the background.
Councilmember Ku,
Here. Here.
Councilmember Tanaka,
Here, sorry about that.
thank you, 7 present.
Thank you very much. So once again, we are doing our meeting by virtual teleconference only. At the back of the City Council agenda, there are instructions on how to join the meeting by phone, computer, or by the Zoom meeting. And we suggest calling in or connecting online 15 minutes prior to the item you wish to speak on. And the city clerk and her team will help queue you up for public speaking. Our first item is our standing item, an update and discussion of the COVID-19 health emergency and our city's response. I believe staff has a report to go through. Mr. City Manager, you want to take it away?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Actually, we've got quite a bit of material to go through. We'll do it briskly, but at the same time, we'd like to get us started off on the right tone. And we have a video to share that was put together by our Palo Alto Youth Council. And I think they've got a great message for the time. So with that, we ask the city clerk to play the video.
I stay home because I want to stop the spread of the coronavirus and protect members of my community.
I stay at home because I want to limit the spread of the virus and set an example for others to do their part in helping the community.
I stay at home to reduce the spread of the virus and to help our community, and so that our lives will go back to normal as soon as they can.
I stay home because social distancing is the most effective way to prevent the spread of the virus.
I stay home because I want to protect my community.
I stay at home because I value the safety and health of my family, friends, and community.
I stay at home for the benefit of my community and the welfare of high-risk individuals.
I stay at home because I care about the well-being of my grandmother.
I stay home to help limit the spread of the virus and help scientists have time to develop a cure.
I stay at home to protect my friends and family and other people who are vulnerable from getting sick.
I stay home to prevent our healthcare system from being overloaded.
I stay home to protect those with health problems from getting sick.
All right, thank you very much. Once again, nothing like a message from our future to set the tone for discussion of what's happening today. So with that, we've got a few things to cover with you this evening. We'll be getting our regular update from Ken Duker, our Director of the Office of Emergency Services, as well as hearing from our federal and state lobbyists. And perhaps we'll take a break at that point, Mr. Mayor, with your indulgence, and take questions. And then I'd like to proceed with providing an update to the council of what we've been doing organizationally. So with that, let me ask Mr. Duker to take the lead first. And
Great.
let's see if I can share my screen here.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Shikata. Good evening. Honorable Mayor, Honorable City Council, it's good to be with you again virtually this evening. My comments will be brief. As you know, we've activated for more than a month now our Emergency Operations Center, the EOC. As part of that operation, as described last meeting, we have a number of staff. Well, every member of the EOC is also doing their so-called day job and regular work in addition, although some more than others. Some of our key objectives are to maintain our essential services, including public safety, public works, utilities, open space rangers, and other features that are essential business, both under the health order definition and our local definition. We're working now, as Mr. Shikata and other staff will describe, to adapt our workspace as an employer as well as a city to make sure that we are au courant and also actually ahead of the game with regard to the health order and emerging best practices. We are doing our best to anticipate likely outcomes, not only with the health order, but as you're going to hear a little bit later with regard to our economic recovery and other contingency plans. I've said at prior meetings, and it bears repeating, that unfortunately, we do not have the luxury of only concerning ourselves about the current pandemic. We are very soon going to be, for example, in fire season. We have ongoing risks to the community that have nothing to do with the pandemic. And sadly, we do not get a so-called hall pass about any of that. And finally, a key role of our Emergency Operations Center is to make sure, to the extent possible, if and when we become eligible for federal or state or other reimbursement, that we have done our appropriate due diligence and completed all necessary documentation to bring that about. So in the interest of time, I'll leave my comments there and I'll be available for further dialogue. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Ken. Next, let me turn to our federal and state lobbyists. Suggest they open up with a few comments, give us a brief updates on what's happening in Washington, D.C. and in Sacramento. And then again, Mr. Mayor, with your indulgence, perhaps open it up for questions and council discussion at that point, or can continue with the presentation. First up, we have Steve Palmer, Vice President with Van Scoyoc Associates, our Washington, D.C. lobbyist, and he'll be followed by Nicolo DeLuca, Senior Director of Northern California for Townsend Public Affairs in Sacramento. So with that, let me ask Steve to lead off.
Thank you, Ed, and thank you, Mayor and members of the council. I'm happy to be here tonight. I don't know if you can see me or not, but hopefully you can. What I'd like to do is just be able to cover where things have gone in Congress in the last month. It's pretty incredible. There have been 3 major bills passed to address the coronavirus public health crisis. And just to touch on them very, very briefly. Okay, I'll start my video now, but there we go. And on the first bill on March 6th was $8 billion, which was primarily aimed at providing additional funds for healthcare resources. That was followed 12 days later by the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, which was really aimed at providing emergency paid sick leave for the short term and family and medical leave extensions for the long term for employees that were affected with a payroll tax credit for private sector employees. It didn't unfortunately apply to public sector entities. And then at the end of March, March 27th, the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, the CARES Act, was enacted by Congress and signed into law. And that was the $2.2 trillion bill that has created a lot of interest in terms of where the money is going and how the city can access that. As you know, the city so far has gotten a little less than $300 million from, or $300,000, I should say, rather, from the Community Development Block Grant Program. The big pots of money were largely for, that could be possibly sought after by the city, is the Coronavirus Relief Fund, which was a $150 billion fund that was created to allow large states and large government jurisdictions like counties and cities above 500,000 people to be able to get direct financial assistance for the work that they've been doing to address the public health crisis. For example, San Mateo County, Santa Clara County, all will be able to access those funds. Unfortunately, the city cannot, and that's been an issue of concern that we've been trying to address, and I'll touch on that briefly in a moment. The portal for that just went live today. The guidance from the Treasury Department is coming out on the 24th of April, And the reason I mention that is because no one really knows exactly where that money can go. Can the county sub-allocate some of that money to the city? Can the county use it for reimbursing expenses that the city's had? We don't know the answer to that yet, and we're waiting until April 24th to be able to get a secure answer, sure answer. The other program I'll just touch on briefly that was included in that was a $350 billion paycheck protection program, which was aimed at small businesses. It's loans for small businesses, primarily focused on preserving the salaries of the employees at those small businesses, as well as covering the expenses of the coronavirus activities. So these are, I mean, the $2.2 trillion sounds like an enormous amount of money, and obviously it is, but it was aimed at primarily preserving the workers and trying to preserve their salaries. And then, as I said in the earlier legislation, trying to help them in terms of family medical leave and sick leave. And what lies ahead very quickly? Congress, House and Senators are primarily the Senate are debating whether or not they both agreed they want to add more money to the Payroll Protection Act, the small business loan program, $250 billion. That program, the Treasury Department has said runs out of money at the end of this week on Friday. So they'd like to be able to put back that additional money. And Senator Chuck Schumer, the Democratic leader, as well as Speaker Pelosi, have been advocating that in addition to that, they'd like to see another $150 billion provided to state and local governments. And where that would affect the city is $53 billion of that would be channeled through the Community Development Block Grant Program through existing formulas. And some of that money would then obviously be made available to the city. They're also arguing about additional money through the SNAP program, the Nutritional Service Program, as well as more money for hospitals. Beyond that, I'll just say, and then I'll be happy to answer any questions at the right time. The next step, what lies ahead after that? Clearly, the government, federal government knows they need to do more. The Congress is prepared to do more. There is some debate about how far they're willing to go because some of the fiscal conservatives are saying they're spending too much money. But there's a real strong interest in an infrastructure bill being involved in what we call phase 4 legislation. We've had 3 pieces of legislation so far. This next one is just a minor adjustment. And phase 4 could be is another significant investment. The House Democrats have proposed $760 billion in infrastructure investment, not just for transportation, but for broadband, for water distribution, for a number of different programs that the city would be eligible for as well. Now, lastly, advocacy. We've been very involved in working with Congresswoman Eshoo, who has been very, very, very supportive of trying to get more money for smaller communities like the city. When I say smaller, below the 500,000 population level where the CARES Act was. The mayor sent a letter yesterday to Congresswoman Eshoo asking her to co-sponsor a bill that a Colorado Congressman Neguse is sponsoring that would create $250 billion for local governments, state and local governments. And we've been working with the National League of Cities as well as the Conference of Mayors as they've been advocating to try to reduce that population level below the 500,000 to cities of 50,000 or more, all in an effort to try to make sure that the city of Palo Alto has access to some of those federal funds. And with that, Mr. Mayor, I'll turn it over to you and Nicolo, and be happy to answer any questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you very much. Mr. City Manager, do you want to go to Nicolo or to council?
Yes, I'd suggest Nicolo provide a quick overview since some of the issues overlap between DC and Sacramento, such that I think it'd be helpful to have both.
Understood.
Absolutely. So just ensuring you all can hear me okay?
Yep.
Perfect. So Mayor, council members, and city manager and staff, Nicolo DeLuca from Townsend Public Affairs. Thank you for inviting me to video into this meeting. Quick update, similar to what Steve did, then happy to answer questions and also talk about what we're seeing going forward. So quick summary, March 16th, state legislature passed 2 COVID-19 related bills equaling $1.1 billion. So giving the governor the authority to spend up to $1.1 billion. They then recessed until April 13th. However, as you all know, that recess has now been pushed back to May 4th. So as of right now, May 4th is the date where the legislature is expected to come back to work into the Capitol. The governor has taken over 50 individual actions, has done over 20 executive orders. His communication has been very thorough, direct, to the point, and frequent. As you may know, every day at 12 o'clock, he does press conferences, updating everyone where things stand. And then we quickly send that information to the city. I'm not going to get into all the different executive orders unless you all would like me to. So that's what the governor is doing. He's got up to $1.1 billion to spend. He is updating everyone on what he's doing. The focus has been on PPEs. The focus has been on hospital beds. That's moving forward. Just recently, April 8th, he sent a letter to Speaker Pelosi and others requesting some support in the next phase of some of the legislation that Steve was talking about, specifically on housing, homelessness, and small business. So that's been a big push from the governor to get additional federal funds and then figure out how to spend that. The legislature coming back May 4th, this is going to be a very, very strange legislative year. Any of the deadlines we're used to, they've all been thrown out the window. As you might remember, this was actually this week and next week were supposed to be the final weeks for legislative committees, certain committee deadlines. That is gone. What we're hearing, and nothing yet official, is when the legislature does come back, all their bill packages will be significantly reduced. So the top focus will be COVID. The second focus will be homeless related. The third focus will be wildfires. With that said, we've definitely been reaching out and keeping our delegation, the Assembly member and the Senator, up to date. Mayor, thank you very much for the letter that you signed. Keeping them up to date as to what the city's doing, staying in touch, checking in with the Speaker's office, Pro Tem's office, and others. And the information that we're getting is at least on the Senate side, they're limiting their bill package to maybe 2 or 3 bills max. The Assembly, we've already talked to other Assembly offices, they're doing their reductions too. And when it comes to the budget, traditionally, so the Constitution says the budget has to be approved by the 15th and that the legislative session has to end at the end of August. For the budget, keeping in mind that the income tax is not due until July 15th, what we expect them to do is adopt what they call a working budget, workload budget, which would be similar to last year. So all the discussions that the governor had in January about his proposals are going to be on hold to at least till next year. So the legislature adopts a workload budget, which is very simple, very status quo. July 15th, most people pay their income tax. So think about August 15th to the end of August, we'll have a greater understanding of what the funding and the revenue is going to look like. So there will be budget trailer bills, essentially August, September. They very well could call a special session going into October, November, possibly December. So what we know is the budget will be adopted. It'll be very simple framework. We'll know the numbers as they come in. And then when it relates to legislation, if it's not COVID or homeless related, it's not going to move forward this year. But there are strong commitments to push other proposals for next year. We have been advocating to the governor and our delegation that the federal funding that is coming to the state, that we, Palo Alto, we get our share due to the fact that, yes, we are a city under 500,000, but we still have many, many COVID-related expenses. So that's something that we're working on. We're beginning, and we continue to tell the story that with a drop of sales tax, transient occupancy tax, and other revenue sources, we need support. We're trying to fill that in too. And then I know that funding for for small businesses is also important. So really want to highlight 3 main proposals from the governor when it comes to small businesses. The first is a California sales tax bridge loan, and that's a deferral of sales use tax for businesses that are up to $50,000 and with less than $5 million in taxable assets. There's also the CDTFA 90-day tax extension, which once requested, you can get a deferral when you pay your CDTFA taxes. And then the third is the California Small Business Loan Guarantee Program. Happy to email this to the city manager and staff to share with the council. And with that, I will happily answer any questions you all may have.
Thank you all very, very much. I'd just like to offer to my council colleagues, please hit the raise hand button if you'd like to ask either Steve or Nicolo a question or two. Vice Mayor Du Bois, then Councilmember Cormack.
Hi, Steve and Nicolo, great to see you guys. This video thing works great. Maybe we could do this in the future with you guys, save you guys the trip.
Sounds good.
On the federal side, I wonder if there's anything being talked about around housing assistance vouchers. So this would be for existing low-income people and affordable housing. And right now they can't be evicted, but they can't necessarily catch up on deferred rent payments. And a lot of these affordable housing projects have obligations to investors that they need to make.
There is funding, a great deal of funding for housing programs in the CARES Act. I should say a great deal, but not as much as others. Unfortunately, I cannot see exactly where there might be something for vouchers, just a quick scan of it. So if I can I get back to you on that and just be able to provide the right answer?
Yeah, that would be great. And then Nicolo, thanks for going over the state budget process. That was one of my questions I had. It also sounds like you may be addressing my other concern, which, I was going to ask if there could really be a moratorium on kind of non-essential bills. And particularly we had so many new housing bills, but it sounds like that the legislature's already decided to do that.
Yeah, and jumping on with regards to housing assistance vouchers, what I'm definitely hearing a lot of discussion on the state side is hypothetically a pool of funds for rental assistance. It's been acknowledged by whether it's the big city mayors up and down the state, legislators, committee staff, what have you. Obviously, there's a homelessness issue going on in the state. No one wants it to grow. So there's definitely a lot of talk amongst housing advocates and others, local government, to push for some type of rental assistance, whether it's a revolving loan program or some type of state fund for that. So I will definitely keep you all posted on where that's going. Right now, with a lot of with the legislature out, there's only so many executive orders the governor can do. Addressing some of your other points with regards to the bills, I have not seen anything like official with the pro tem stamp or the speaker's stamp. I have seen memos that says, hey, committee staff and others, we're going to have an expedited legislative process. So let's reduce a lot of our bills. Let's make sure it's only COVID related, homelessness related, or wildfire related. So I do suspect a lot of the authors, for example, one of the senators that I spoke to today, she was knocking down her bill list from about 21 to I think 2 or 3. And so I'll keep an eye on all the other housing bills. I've communicated a lot with Senate Governance and Finance Committee staff. As you know, they go through a lot of the housing bills. There was earlier in the session the desire to have some type of housing production bill. Right now, that's not their top focus. Top focus is COVID. My heart of hearts, I think there might be 1 or 2 housing bills this year, but I also assume that would be pushed towards next year.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it will give us some time to kind of work with all the new ones from last year and the year before. And I think in particular areas, we're struggling with public transparency being online. The other thing that's coming are the RENA numbers and the housing allocation numbers. And it'll be interesting, and maybe you can talk to some of the folks, like how is the impact of the virus being taken into consideration, and how will cities be able to kind of weigh in before those numbers become official? They were on a pretty tight schedule before. Hopefully that schedule is being pushed out a little bit, because that's something we're going to live with for next 7 or 8 years.
Yeah, I suspect that gets pushed back. There's been requests to push back a lot of different things, whether it's timeline for public records, whether it's when you submit a proposal for a housing development. I have seen requests for delay the RENA numbers and when how that process moves. I've also seen requests where when municipalities receive state funding and there's a certain timeline when your grant agreement that you have to complete the project by, there'll need to be extensions there. So when it comes to the budget process, whereas they're going to go back to a workload budget, I think there's going to be a lot of different cleanup language, and whether the trailer bills or others, about timeline extensions, whether it's RENA, whether it's public records, what have you. So definitely see that being worked on when we get back to whatever getting back to will look like.
Yeah, and then finally, and I'll let my colleagues jump in, we've already been talking and struggling a little bit with, how can we support our local community serving businesses, local retailers, local retail like services, and I'm sure every city is having this fear that a lot of those businesses have been here for a long time, and once they close, it's going to take a long time for somebody new to kind of move in and maybe restart that kind of business. So we're definitely feeling some urgency, and keeping us apprised of what the state can help, how the house state can help, be appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Cormack.
Thank you, Mayor Fine. Mr. Palmer, good evening. This is, you're probably glad you're at the beginning of our agenda and not at the end, given the time difference.
Thank you very much.
Two questions for you. The first is, I was intrigued by your description of the guidance coming out on April 24th. The question I had appears to be the answer. You have sub-allocation. What is it that we could or should do in this short time frame between now and then to encourage that as an option, and or work with our own county?
So I think, Council Member, your last point is the key one, and that is to work directly with the county. It's not clear that the county has to sub-allocate. It's not clear that they can sub-allocate. I know that some of your fellow cities in California are reaching out to their counties directly to ask for funding and put pressure on them to give them a share of that funding. I'm not trying to in any way undermine Santa Clara County, but I do think, and on behalf of the city, that I would appeal directly to the County Board of Supervisors and make sure they understand the needs of the city.
Great, thank you. I'm confident that our mayor and city manager, who have been Johnny on the spot with those letters, will get one out soon. And then the second question has to do with the CDBG funds. You suggested it's possible we could end up with more of those. Would those likely come with the same restrictions that we have now about what they can use for?
No, that's a great question. No, the HUD is granting enormous flexibility in terms of these coronavirus CDBG funds. So there is not the same restrictions that you have under the normal allocation. You can use the new funds with a lot more flexibility for whatever needs you have. Excellent.
Thank you so much. And then Mr. DeLuca, thank you for going over the homelessness. That was my main question I had about how things will proceed in terms of what's going on at the state level with respect to us. And you've probably never been this busy when the legislature has been in recess.
Well said. My 4-year-old son the other day told me I'm always on the phone.
All right. Thanks so much, Mayor. Back over to you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Next, I see Councilmember Koo.
Apologize, I have to unmute. Thank you both, Mr.
Lydia, we're having a hard time hearing you. You may need to put the mic closer.
Okay. I just want to say thank you to both Mr. DeLuca and Mr. Palmer for being here. Is this better?
Ooh, a lot better.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So for Mr. DeLuca, I wanted to say, on the homeless, the funding that, or the legislation that the state is going to be looking at, focus on homeless. Can we be sure that, there's different category of homelessness. There's folks who have mental issues and who need, hospitalization, etc. Can we make sure that the legislature is kind of paying attention to that? So, we don't put everybody with different issues into one location. So we're actually they won't be actually treated then for what they have. Instead, they'll just be, sheltering in place at a facility. So I hope that, when they're looking at this, they can look at it within the categories. I can't see you, sorry. And
absolutely.
Thank you. And then the other part is, I see in the budget committees, the Assembly Committee on Budget, their letter that they had sent out, it says that the Assembly will defer all deliberation on special fund programs such as the greenhouse gas reduction funds until June 15th. Does Palo Alto get these funds?
That is a good question. I don't know.
Okay, because if we do, then we kind of have to make sure that we put that, make sure we make that request and put the application. So if city manager can make sure that we get that. I think Tom has already asked the questions on RENA and Plan Bay Area, and hopefully they will push that back because there's less transparency now. But otherwise, I think that's about it. Thank you.
Any other of my colleagues? Just raise your hand. I don't see anyone. So I'll just jump in quickly. I want to thank you both for joining us. Really appreciate your work on our behalf, especially in these difficult times.
Adrian, sorry, both Liz and Eric were raising their hand. I don't know if you saw that.
Get them on the thing. Okay. Councilmember Philseth.
Thank you. Yeah, just briefly. On the PPP, the Paycheck Protection stuff, either you folks got any visibility on when people think that banks are going to be up engaged and working on that?
It's a really good question. So, any visibility or information?
Yeah, that.
Okay. Councilmember, it's a great question because the Treasury Department's guidance on that program didn't come out until Thursday night, last Thursday, and then Friday the banks went live. And they, as you probably read, they ran into a lot of problems because the banks didn't understand exactly what they were supposed to be doing. The last I heard was on Friday night, they'd given out $90 billion worth of loans. And they anticipate, Treasury Department anticipates that they're going to run out of money on Friday. That $350 billion, $49 billion will all be used up by Friday, which is why they're pushing to get another $250 billion approved by Congress for the Paycheck Protection Program. So I think it's proving to be something that small business originally was slow in trying to get at. And I think a lot of the really small businesses, you know, the mom and pop and individual companies didn't quite have the ability to gain access as quickly as some of the larger small businesses. I don't know how you quantify that, but I do think people are now becoming more, Treasury's opening the door up to some of the, you know, 1 and 2 individuals, small businesses, and they're getting access to some of that money.
Yeah, I think there's a significant number that are sort of going, well, we applied, we have no idea, did they get our application? Are we going to get anything when? You know, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think you're right. I've heard that as well. I do know the other thing I had heard, the reason I tried to differentiate between the two was the small businesses that apparently had relationships with like Bank of America or Wells Fargo, you know, the big banks were the ones that were getting the loans right away, and the ones that didn't, you know, let's say they didn't have that kind of line of credit, they were the ones that were suffering a little bit longer wait.
Okay, thanks.
Councilmember Niss.
Okay, am I unmuted?
Yes.
So looking at Nick, I think, or maybe Steve, I'm not sure which one of you. The county is responsible for the healthcare in our county. It's responsible for the homeless. It's responsible for any number of other issues that involve healthy people in our county. But I know that they will be resisting this because they too have new needs that they didn't have before. What do you suggest our role is in that, other than writing nice letters?
Well, my suggestions are a couple of things. When it comes to the homeless funding, in years past, it's gone into 3 buckets. The big cities, top 13 populated cities, the counties, and then the COCs, continuums of care. My thoughts would be twofold. One, as a city, if this is what the city decides, we work with our delegation to get some carve-out language that says either cities can be, if they want, to be a recipient of some of those funds. if that's something that we could discuss later, if that's if that's something the city wants to do. Second would be to start working with the county now about what your needs are. So they're either going to address them or help you as a sub-grantee get some of those funds. And so those are kind of the two ways that I see it. But I do suspect that similar to years past, when it comes to the homeless funding, they'll use the same formula, which is direct allocation to the 13 big cities, direct allocation to counties, and direct allocation to the continuums of care. I see you smiling, so
It doesn't include us.
Yeah, well, if there's something, this is definitely something that we can work on. I know some cities that aren't the big 13, some would like to see some of the funds, or some would like to see the money go to the counties and pass down to the cities a lot faster. I think one thing that's been well, many things have been clear from the COVID-19 response, but part of it is it's time, and more time. I've heard municipalities up and down throughout the Bay Area, they need those funds right away. You can't wait for money from your county if you got to put up a porta potty or a hand washing station or what have you. So I think that's definitely something that we could seize on and help either make it our main ask or work with others to help make that ask, that we get those funds as fast as humanly possible.
So the Cities Association is talking about it, our 15 cities, because they know how frustrating it's been in the past. So anything you can do to help us with this would really make a difference. It is tough to get money out of the county.
And council member, if I may, that's the reason. Hi, council member, how are you? It's the reason I mentioned the $53 billion of community development block grant funds that the congressional Democrats are advocating for right now, because that's a huge amount of money. And as I mentioned to Councilmember Cormack, it's very flexible in terms of how it can be used. I mean, to give you the size of the magnitude, the city was able to get about $295,000 out of a $2 billion pot of CDBG money. Imagine if there was $53 billion and 70% of that was directly allocated to cities like Palo Alto. So you'd have a huge amount of money that was available to the city. And that's why we've been trying to advocate for that. Right? And the mayor was kind enough to send a letter to NASU asking her to co-sponsor and advocate for Congressman Negus's $250 billion bill. So we're trying to push for more money, because the money that was in the CARES Act, it's hard to believe that you could say $2.2 trillion, but there's a lot of fighting going on over that $150 billion that was made available for state and local governments. And it is going to be hard to get some of that.
Yes, it is. They really hang on to it tightly. And we've pleaded many times in the past with the county to almost no avail. So it's going to take some real effort on our part, and probably some calls to our elected officials as well.
Great.
Thanks, Adrian.
Thank you, Councilmember Innes. Councilmember Tanaka.
Yeah, thank you so much for giving us an update and lobbying on our behalf. I really appreciate it. So I heard that the PPP program, the Paycheck Protection Program, when you actually look at the number of small businesses in the country, only works out to be about $12,000 per business. Now that means some businesses are going to get some and some businesses aren't going to get some. So definitely good to hear that more money is on the way, because $12,000 for small, even for a small business, is not a lot of money. My hard question for you guys, and I realize you're not going to be able to give anything definitive because things are still up in the air, but given what you know about us and given what you know about the programs coming down from the federal level, from the state, etc., what do you think is the dollar amount that we might be able to get from these different entities? What do you think we could expect? Are we looking? I mean, and right now, even an order of magnitude would be good. It's going to be like $1 million. Is it going to be 10 million, 100 million? You know.
So Nicola, I'll go ahead and I'll start, council member, and I'll turn it over to you next. I'm going to totally punt on this, and I know it's not a satisfactory answer, but you're right. The Senate Republicans and the president have said we need $250 billion more for the Paycheck Protection Program. There's no sense that they're going to agree, though, to more money for state and local governments. There have been a number of conservative senators who have said, why do I want to raise federal taxes to reimburse them for local taxes? So it's a challenge, and one of the reasons we're fighting so hard for this additional money that I was talking about, the $53 billion in CDBG, is that that is the first opportunity that Congress, anyone has put on the table in terms of providing additional money for smaller cities and communities like Palo Alto. Short answer, I guess, is, you know, again, in order of magnitude, that's why I brought it up. If the city got $300,000 out of a $2 billion pot of money, and there was roughly $35 billion in direct allocation, that would be a significant increase in funding for the city. But we just don't know if it's gonna be included in this bill or the next bill, and you know how long this continues on.
Well, let's say it was. So how much would that be for us in terms of rough, you know, swag of an estimate? Because I realize we don't know now because nothing's been approved and there's a lot more battles to be fought. But I'm just trying, because you know, we're going into our budget cycle right now, trying to figure out, you know, what is our revenue going to be, and it'd be good to know, even as a placeholder, what we could expect. If it's just 250, then okay, that's good to know, right? Or if we think we count on $1 million or 10 million or something, that's also good to know.
And I got to tell you, council member, knowing that you're talking about your city's budget, I wouldn't begin to try to answer that question because it's impossible to be able to tell you with any certainty. I mean, I know, like I said, I was shocked, and I never would have been able to tell you that Congress could pass 3 bills in 1 month that totaled well over $2.2 trillion. But, you know, there is no, so far as you saw, there's very little money in that for local governments. And there's no strong feeling across the board that local governments should get more than they have already gotten. So I can't tell you for sure that if you're talking about your budget, I would not talk about any more than you have already.
Okay, so we shouldn't count on getting additional federal or state dollars at this point in time. We should just factor in what we know and what we have.
I'll defer to Niccolo on the state funding, but in terms of federal funding, I think in terms of, I would always be much more cautious than I would be expansive about something like that. Obviously, if you get more money, it's a windfall, but in terms of budgeting, I would not want to go beyond what you already know you're going to get.
Yeah, not what we want to hear, but if that's the truth and that's where it is what it is.
And I would just agree with Steve. I think he laid it out well. And from the state side, I mean, we still don't know the magnitude of what the deficit is facing the state. And from everyone I've talked to, that obviously the state's going to have to backfill all of their loss, just like the counties will, just like cities will. But what I do recommend strongly for Palo Alto is just what is our specific Palo Alto story? How many hotels are closed because of COVID? What does that normally mean to the general fund? How many small businesses have shut their doors? What's that revenue looking like? What did sales tax used to be? And now what is sales tax like? And so we really have to make our story clear as to why specifically we need funding. But from the state side, it is still very much undetermined until we know exactly the magnitude of everything, until we know the magnitude of the complete loss of revenue.
Okay, well, thank you for trying. So I guess right now we'll just count 0 for now until you guys are able to find out more. Thank you.
Correct, thank you.
Great, so thank you everyone. Thank my colleagues for their questions. I guess one kind of stepping back is, and Niccolo, you just touched on this in terms of like what Palo Alto's story is, but how do we position ourselves more effectively for things that could be coming down the pike? And then Steve, at the federal level, like, do you have any estimate of like how many rounds of these like hundreds of billions or $1 trillion packages are going to be created? I mean, does anyone?
Mayor, well, I see Niccolo reaching for something. I'll jump in first. I think if anybody could tell us how long the health crisis would last, we'd have a better answer. I don't think we do.
Okay. And how do you think the city can potentially position itself, whether it's like CDBG funds or some of the affordable housing funds my colleagues mentioned? Is this storytelling?
Well, you know, Nicolo's right in terms of the transient hotel tax, the losses of the revenue. But I also think too, not just talking about revenue loss, because that is falling on deaf ears, like I tried to say earlier in Washington. There's not a lot of support for trying to raise taxes federally to pay for local taxes lost. But there is an interest in trying to support local governments that are having to fight the COVID-19 epidemic. So I think focusing on what the city's doing, focusing on the costs of the city, focusing on how you're helping your residents, I think those are the things that carry a lot more weight than just sort of saying we've lost out.
That helps, thank you.
And Mayor, I would chime in. Sorry, my son wanted me to open a little soda for him. Definitely telling our story, but also how things have been moving like all the something that we've been doing for the city for the last few years is telling your story when it relates to housing, all the different changes the city's made in some of your zoning ordinances, all the different things that the city's been doing to get more, entice more housing production going. So we talk about everything that we've been doing, and now like where were we right before COVID happened, what certain projects could be at risk, what does that mean, but also telling it in a regional, with a regional story too, not just Palo Alto, but what's going on in the peninsula and why we're an important part of that. And so we've been briefing with your letter and all of the updates, Speaker's office, Pro Tem's office, and the various policy committee staff. We're going to keep doing that, as many people as we can keep talking to, telling our story. And then the moment that the funding, when the green light goes on for the funding, we just have to pounce.
Nice. Okay. Thank you very much. Council members Filseth and Nis, I see both your lights. I just want to remind us we are coming up on the hour, and this is only the first part of our discussion on the COVID thing. So if they're very brief questions, Councilmember Filseth, then Nis, but let's keep them brief.
Thanks. Sorry, really brief. I think everybody knows that California's revenue model is extremely precarious in general. And one of the big outstanding risks is that if there's a massive recession, you've got these giant pension liabilities that suddenly become a lot more serious. Anybody talking about that yet?
I'm not hearing it as much, but I'm sure it could very well be being discussed right now.
I expect it's probably pretty early. Okay, thanks.
Councilmember Nis.
I don't have anything, sorry.
Oh, I saw you raising your hand.
No, it's because Nellie's continuing to help me make this thing work properly tonight. Sorry.
All right. Well, I want to thank both you gentlemen. I'll just note to my colleagues, this is an ongoing thing. We can certainly write Steve and Nicolo in the future via email or host another session like this. But I would like to move us on to the rest of the update for this item. So gentlemen, thank you both. Really appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you, everyone.
Mr. Shikata, back to you.
All right, let's see if I can get this to work. Are you seeing my slide again?
Yep, we're on the federal and state legislative slide.
Very good. Okay, we want to move off of that and turn it back to home. So I think that where we ended in terms of how best to tell the city story is a good place to pick up. And our story really is in terms of the services that we've continued to provide to the community and a series of actions as Mr. Duker got us started talking about what we've done in direct response to the emergency that we find ourselves in. With that said, let me do, and I'll do this really quickly, so apologize if I'm skimming over some things, but I'd like to give you an opportunity for any questions you might have and talk about really the parallel organization. Once again, we talked about this last time, that we've now established two organizations, one the city, the normal city, and the other being the Emergency Operations Center, the EOC, that we had an org chart of last time. And really focusing on a number of strategies. But in terms of some major themes, let me start off just noting that we've redeployed a number of staff from their normal duties to our state of emergency priorities, both directly on the Emergency Operations Center and a few areas that I'll mention in a moment. We've realigned our workforce duties to reflect the remote work. The same way we're doing this meeting here tonight, we are doing training on standing up commission meetings and the like, and community engagement, as you'll hear about shortly, while at the same time recognizing that there have been challenges that every individual has faced, ranging from individual issues to family responsibilities for childcare and homeschooling. One of the key strategies that we've embarked on is this rotation of week on, week off duties for a number of our functions, in particular public works and utilities, where that has been an important approach to maximize the distance, so to speak, between our crews and allow a minimizing the mixing of individuals on a day-to-day basis to instead do it on a week-to-week basis in order to just minimize the number of contacts with new people that are happening on a day-to-day basis. Next, we're really accelerating our community recovery efforts. And again, I'll speak to that. And as well as using the time to catch up on some administrative work. And then finally, on the topic of administrative leave, I do want to note, as I did last week, that we've now ramped up our administrative requirements for actual use of administrative leave. Just to give you a quick sampling, let me just note a few examples of the areas that individual departments have undertaken and will be focused on over the course of the next few weeks. Again, this is just a sampling, so certainly invite the council to ask questions about any individual department if you'd like to in a moment. First, in terms of administrative services, in addition to processing payments and now a significant number of refunds, as we've been talking about the monetary transactions, really key that ASD has been our front line and preparing us for the record keeping necessary for the Federal Emergency Management Administration's record keeping requirements should the opportunity present itself for any reimbursement through FEMA. In terms of community services, just want to highlight the implementation of a number of virtual programming offerings both currently as well as really looking forward to the period of recovery, what those programs could look like both in person with social distancing as well as additional virtual programming. And then one that's not noted here in particular, but redeployment of staff that had been working on community center facilities in particular custodial facilities, custodial duties, to now working on the other essential facilities that do have our public safety personnel requiring additional, more frequent cleanings in order to maintain hygiene. And then finally, in terms of our fire, certainly first responders, but now as our inspectors don't have as many development permits and development construction ongoing, they're turning their attention to being prepared for the upcoming wildland fire season. So important function that we're now making contacts into the hillside residents in order to get prepared for that next threat. In terms of information technology, perhaps not widely assumed, but these are folks that have a very high touch jobs. And as it relates to providing support on an ongoing basis to our other employees, both working in City Hall or working remotely, to provide technical support. And again, lots of high touch, literally, in terms of keyboards, equipments, and the like. And so their own PPE requirements has been an important area of focus. Library staff really took the lead in both the standing up of our call center as well as ongoing operation of the call center, including researching and providing support to our ongoing communications to the community. Planning and development services has ongoing efforts on processing applications which have continued, as well as soon to be rolling out of online plan review, which is really something that has been awaited for years, that we're now really being able to focus on getting that up and running. And then finally, just note for Public Works and Utilities, I mentioned earlier the implementation and the adjustment of our work schedules and crew schedule to reflect both physical separation of the work shifts as well as the focus on essential duties. Again, just a sampling of the activities that our departments are working on. And then just in terms of a few statistics I want to share with you. The first we touched on last week in terms of overall allocations, that roughly half of our personnel, our overall employee workforce is now working from home. A little less than half have been designated as essential to report to on-site duties, certainly public safety, as well as our essential utilities and essential infrastructure work, and about 5% representing either administrative leave, sick leave of one form of leave or another. And then drilling down on the administrative leave in particular based on our first pay period. And these numbers are not exactly a subset of the 5% that's above because there is overlap. But let me just note them quickly in terms of the breakdown among departments. I would note that among our community services department, as you see, at 31% and library at 13%, that a majority of the administrative leave usage within those two departments were for part-time and hourly employees that were unable to remote work, unable to telework because they had not to that point been assigned city laptops or VPN access. And so really during this first pay period, our focus had been on standing up the call center, getting that put together, as well as establishing telework for the full-time employees that were obviously, and for good reason, our focus in that first pay period. So now, as we're looking forward, the additional support from IT and through the departments is focused on getting additional equipment out to the workers that were not able to get that in that first pay period. And then finally, just note on that note at the bottom of the slide that about 50% of the admin leave hours were directed by management to support social distancing. That really does relate specifically to the public works utilities and to a certain extent police shifts as well, to reflect our transition and the move to the week-to-week on and off shifts, or as applicable in other parts of the operation. And then just looking forward to the budget process, as we had talked previously, our efforts to this point have really been on getting through the emergency period. And then unfortunately, we're not going to have a moment to breathe, in that as of next week, next Monday, we'll start our discussion of the upcoming fiscal year budget. I will be presenting to you and simply transmitting to you the proposed budget, which we've talked about previously, but also provide a preview of some of the fiscal considerations, clearly pretty drastic issues that will need to be discussed, including potentially labor negotiations that will be starting that discussion next week. Over the course of the remainder of the month of April and into May, the Finance Committee will be considering our utility rates. During the month of May, the budget will be discussed by the council as a whole, per your direction last week, and discussion of specific strategies to be considered for this new fiscal year budget. And then June 23rd, it's actually June 22nd, thanks for correction to the city, from the city clerk, that the 22nd is a Monday of that week, where we would be bringing forward the budget for council's consideration, and then really right around the corner to be starting our new fiscal year, July 1st. And then just briefly want to touch on this slide that had been previously discussed last week, that the city is providing and focused on business support on a number of fronts, ranging from our call center and being able to respond to questions from businesses to extended payments and permit extensions as well. So just touch on that briefly, but also to speak to the direction we received from the City Council last week, where the council expressed an interest in developing some options for additional support for small businesses. So our work is well underway now on two fronts. One, the direct small business financial support, and to develop some options. We've been in touch with the City of Mountain View, as was discussed last week, as well as looking at other options and some logistics as to what direct financial support could consist of. And the second related to the business roundtable that was discussed, to really look both near term as well as longer term on a recovery strategy, recognizing that it will take both immediate actions as well as those that may take a little longer to implement. That we're working on putting together a work plan that will bring that back for council in quick action in order to do some outreach on a broad spectrum of our business community. And then just to come back to a recognition of both dealing with the emergency as well as what it will take to move beyond the emergency. You saw this, actually a version of this Emergency Operations Center organization chart before. Now, I think our EOC staff has had the opportunity to color it up a bit, but I would just like to focus on John Late, who is, as you know, our planning director by day, but now night job, taking on an increasing role on leading our recovery branch. I think this is, to the extent that the org chart or a living document, you will see that climbing up in terms of both focus and level of activity in our recovery branch over the next few weeks. And then finally, I just wanted to note for anyone who's not caught any of our prior briefings that we have multiple channels through which members of the public can stay informed and be engaged with our ongoing communications, with our key messages that we would like to reiterate that we are doing what we can to stay at home and bend the curve, as has been reported some progress in that note, and we would like to continue that, that we're doing what we can at the city level to support our residents and the community staying together in terms of connecting with neighbors and providing volunteer efforts. And then finally, that we are truly in this together. That will continue over the course of the next several weeks as we maintain our ongoing focus on emergency services. We're continuing to maintain connections through our community-based organizations, and increasingly, as has been presented, our business efforts and recovery as an increasing focus of our attention. And then finally, just note that the council will be busy, not that you aren't already busy, over the course of the remainder of April, May, and June. I know this is probably difficult for folks to read, but in April, already mentioned the transmittal of the budget document overall, and the Finance Committee starting to talk about a few of our utility rates and a number of our business activities kicking up. Then in May, those budget deliberations will continue, with the Finance Committee also taking up other utilities and utility rates. And then in June, coming back with both the proposed budget for adoption, recognizing perhaps not unlike what's happening in Sacramento, that it will need to be a living document, as we recognize that a number of issues will be playing out concurrently in terms of the economy. And we'll also, over the course of the next couple of months, hopefully have a very specific plan moving forward to support both the support for our small business community, as well as the longer term strategies as it relates to recovery and long-term resilience for the community. So with that, that concludes our presentation. Mr. Mayor, I'd like to turn it back to you for any council discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Shikata. So to my colleagues, please just raise your hands in the Zoom meeting and I'll get to you. Councilmember Nis and then Tanaka. You're muted, Liz. There.
So, yeah, listening to all that you have said, did I hear you say something about working with some of the other cities on this, or did I mishear you?
Well, actually, I'm not sure I hit that specifically, but I am. And we are working with our neighboring cities, both on regular check-ins in terms of what's going on among the different cities, as well as really, to your point earlier, in terms of working with the county, making sure that we're working collectively with the county, recognizing that we have some common interests, and making sure that we're in sync on what those are and our advocacy there.
So I talked with one of the mayors today from another city, and their hope is that there can be strength in numbers, knowing how difficult it can be to extract funds from the county. So I hope that's something that we'll think about. One more thing, as you go to put your budget together, which is going to be a very trying year to do that, are you thinking that we'll have something permanent by June, or is that too soon? Or are you maybe looking ahead to September for a finale already? Any thoughts on that yet?
Well, I think we're definitely expecting it to require a lot of flexibility. And so we'll know some things by June, and we'll know more the further down the calendar we get. So I expect that we'll want to bring to the council some building blocks, some things that the council may feel are logical to proceed with right away, and some things that may take a little longer time to play out. So I think we'll bring you a range of options.
Well, we wish you all luck with that. That's going to be a really difficult one. And at the Cities Association the other night, they said the same. Everyone is concerned about trying to put a budget in place by June, and knows that it'll be very difficult. So we'll be supporting you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Tanaka.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. Last week, we talked about relief for utility bills for businesses. And I think it was Molly or you or someone mentioned that there's actually a program already in place on residential. And I think you guys said you're going to have some information on it this week. And so you talked a little bit about it, but I didn't hear much about that you guys said you would talk about this week. Is this something you guys are going to forward to us, or do you guys want to talk about it now, or what's
Sure. Let me lead off, and perhaps either Megan or Dean Batchelor would like to expand. But actually, wasn't part of this presentation because I think we've saturated the communication channels over the last or the prior week. So yes, we are providing a deferral of payments on the commercial utilities as well as residential, so it applies to both. And those were pushed out, as to your point, we had the discussion last Monday, and I think it was no later than Wednesday that we really saturated, tried to make sure that anyone who was interested in the topic knows that that relief is available. So with that, Dean or Megan would like to chime in. Or? Yes, looks like Megan's unmuted. Oh, there you
Sorry
are.
about that. Yes, last week we posted information on our website about both the residential and commercial utility programs available. And we also shared it multiple times in our e-blast last week, twice to be clear, related to both commercial and what's available for our residential customers. And we also shared it through our social media channels.
So is it just deferrals or also forgiveness?
Well, let's go ahead and let Dean reply.
So Councilmember Tanaka, this is Dean Batchelor. So at this period of time, all it is right now is that it is not to look at forgiveness at this period of time. We are just leaving the bill open at this point, whatever the resident or the small business can pay. Then at that point, we're taking those payments. And then at that point, we'll look into what those funds that they'll owe us, and then we'll make some determinations on what we can do further.
Let me add, Dean, when you're ready.
Go ahead, Ed.
Okay, yeah, I'd also like to add a couple of things. One, just point of information so that the public's aware that our utilities are run as enterprises, and it's not, or it certainly is a situation in which we have to encapsulate both the revenues and the expenditures. So any relief, any actual, can't remember what term you used, forgiveness would need to come basically at the cost of other ratepayers. And so that's, obviously a difficult issue. It's unlike a private enterprise. So that's one note. The other is to recognize that the UAC, the Utility Advisory Commission, as well as the Council Finance Committee will be reviewing the rates, proposed rates for the upcoming year over the course of the next few weeks. And in recognition of the state of emergency, staff has put together modified proposals for consideration that would have zero increases for the upcoming year.
Okay, because I think the Mountain View program actually had as part of its program to have deferrals for residents and businesses. And that was our topic last year. I mean, not this deferrals, but forgiveness, which was the topic of last week. And that's why I'm asking about it, because I know that I've been talking to a few people over the past week, and people are saying that it's great that you defer it, but we're living month to month, or we're surviving month to month, and so if someone have to pay 6 months worth of utility bills, we would still make us go bankrupt. So I think there's a lot of people really hurting out there, and so I think as you guys explore the Mountain View program more or other programs, I think it's really key to keep this in mind, because you're going to bankrupt some people.
Understood.
Okay. Second topic is right now we charge, although it's a minor amount of money, I think it's like 25 cents or 50 cents, I don't actually remember, for a paper bag at grocery markets, right? If you have to buy a paper bag. In the past, and I think the reason why we did it was because we wanted people to bring their reusable bags to the supermarket. But now, because of all the COVID-19 thing, you can't do that anymore. So basically what you're doing is you're basically increasing the cost of groceries for people. And so, it's not a lot of money, but I'm just curious to know, is this something the city is actively enforcing? Or if, let's say, some grocery stores decide that, hey, given that customers no longer have the option of bringing in their own grocery bag, maybe for now the city is not going to like aggressively try to enforce the paper bag collection fee, just because I think the purpose of it wasn't necessarily a revenue generating thing. It was more of a encouraging people to bring their own reusable bag.
Right. Let me ask Brad Eggleston to respond on behalf of staff. Well, in particular on the issue of enforcement. To your point, Councilmember, it's not a big dollar amount, and in fact, none of that money comes to the city. But that said, Brad, why don't you speak to how that works?
Sure. Good evening, Council. Councilmember Tanaka. Ed is right. We're not actively enforcing this. And you're correct that when the ordinance was first adopted, the purpose for it really was to have people pay the costs for the bags that the stores were already incurring, but had been giving away for free. So that's been in effect for a while. But that's correct. We're not actively enforcing it this time.
Okay, great. That makes sense. Thank you. And I think you guys mentioned multiple times that you're not actively enforcing parking unless someone calls in about a problem, correct?
Correct. We're not enforcing any of the time-limited restrictions, and so I know that police department's focused on safety-related parking issues.
Okay. Because I spoke with a few people over the week about, I guess there's like an RV or maybe RVs parked in Green Meadow, and it's been parked there for, I don't know, 6 months or some long period of time, and people have been calling in about it, and staff hasn't responded. So I was just wondering, is there any update on that, or what's the story about that?
Sure. Let me ask our Police Chief Bob Johnson to chime in if he can.
Yeah. Good evening, council members and mayor. We addressed this earlier on a city conference call with some of the stakeholders, and we've been proactively responding when we get these complaints. Complaints are drastically down. We're familiar with the Green Meadows complaints, and that's something we're just starting up. Again, is to actually go out, look at the RVs, where they're parked and everything else. So we are responding, and we actually did a count over the weekend, and it's about a 50% reduction, especially on El Camino, as far as the RVs in the area. But we will continue to respond if somebody calls in with a complaint.
Okay, that's great to hear, because the people told me that they called in a bunch of times and basically nothing happening. So that's why I was curious. So thank you for your work on this.
Yeah.
And I believe it's 329-2413, the police non-emergency number that we're now really funneling issues associated with shelter in place or essential businesses. So I certainly want to reinforce the ability for people to call in those issues.
Thank you. Councilmember Cormack.
Thank you, Mayor Fine. Thank you, Mr. Shikata, and all of the staff who just pops in and out as we need them. It's kind of amazing. Specifically, I want to comment on the utilities crews taking a week on and off. Thank you for sharing that information and helping us all understand one of the reasons we might be doing this. I know that other utilities are doing similar things, so appreciate understanding more of that. As a matter of fact, I was able to use that as an explanation to someone earlier today who was asking some questions about item 3A will be discussed, well, which will come up later. One thing we haven't discussed, starting to think about, is the role of childcare in our recovery. So it's not a small business, so we haven't heard too many people talk about it, but as people do go back to work, I mean, talk about an essential nonprofit. And I don't expect an answer this evening, but I assume we're already working with Palo Alto Community Childcare. But there's also the Children's Preschool Center and so many private ones, but they are all nonprofits, so they'll be unlikely to benefit from these many plans we've been talking about. So if you have an update, great, but otherwise maybe something for us to learn more about next week to be sure that we're thinking about that as we get into recovery. Summer camps, community service department. We haven't talked about that at all, and yet we're in that stage. Is there anything, Mr. Shikata or Director O'Kane, that you want to share with the community about our beloved summer camps?
Thank you for that opening. Let me invite Kristen to speak to both that as well as the childcare issue, given that Kristen and Minka Vanderswalk have been maintaining ongoing communication with our nonprofit partners.
Thank you. Good evening, council members and Mayor Fine. So first, tackling the childcare piece. Like Ed said, Minka and I are still meeting with the nonprofit providers regularly. We're also coordinating with a lot of the childcare providers. One of the items, and it is related to summer camps, is whether we start summer camps like we normally would in June, or do we start preparing for an early camp? So when parents do start going back to work and school-age kids are not able to return to school, there might be a need for us to have camps early. So we're starting to look into that. We have 3 scenarios really for summer camps, that being one. The other is just status quo summer camps, and the third being summer camps that require fewer participants, but more camp offerings to maintain a minimum amount of kids in a camp for social distancing. So we're looking into all 3 of those options.
Great, thank you so much for sharing that. And then the last 2 things before I just touch briefly on the budget. I know that the mayor mentioned last week, perhaps even the week before, about speeds on streets. It really is getting quite concerning, frankly. So any thoughts from the city manager or the police department about what you can do? I mean, they're gone so fast, you can't even like wave at them and tell them to slow down. So any creative ideas, whether it's some communication or enforcement or I don't know what?
And while the police chief gets queued up, let me also offer the opportunity for Philip Cami to chime in if he'd like to. So go ahead, Chief.
Yeah, so as far as the police department goes, we actually have picked up this weekend. We started enforcement, actually led to a couple of DUI arrests, drunk driving under the influence arrests. So we've started ramping that back up because, again, we feel people have had plenty of opportunity to be aware of the restrictions and comply with the rules of the road. So you'll see more proactive enforcement out there, but at the same time, we're still advocating social distancing for our officers.
Thank you. And Mr. Cami, as you're getting queued up, one of the other things we've heard is we've heard a few people ask that specific roads be closed to vehicles. So if you want to touch on that as well.
Sure. Hi, there I am. Hi, good evening. Yes, so apologies for the shouting in the background. So yeah, the challenges of having a 6-year-old home. It's just finished dinner. So yeah, we are actually currently looking at opportunities to do to roll out something very similar to what you've seen in Oakland, Minneapolis, and Denver. So we're reviewing options right now. Can you please close the door? I'm actually
all our video calls are like this. All our meetings, they're great.
Yeah, I thought this would be the quiet place. I'm actually hiding in his room. So yeah, we're currently reviewing potential opportunities to close some streets to local traffic, which would potentially, provide us, some sense of more safety. Yeah, it's definitely been an increase in drivers' speeds seen throughout the Bay Area, and that's something that Oakland also had noted in their slow streets program. So yep, we're looking at the same thing and hope to have something for you to review soon.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And yeah, that's a creative place to be. I'm unfortunately have to be near where the dog needs to go in and out. So if I ever disappear, that's why. And then real quickly, I know that Councilmember Koo had asked last week about gardening. It continues to be an issue. Maybe, I mean, I'm not the only one who has a lawnmower and is sharing it or helping other people mow their lawns. So just Chief Duker, I know this sounds like a small thing, but is this something the ESVs can help coordinate so it's not going up to the city and back down?
Both Ken and perhaps Chief Johnson may want to comment on this as well.
Sure.
Ahead,
just to clarify on the topic of neighbors sharing gardening equipment, I wasn't sure what the question was. If you could.
So, so we're getting a number of questions and emails and calls about people very concerned because they're older and unable to mow their own lawn or don't have the right equipment. And so I know it sounds like a small thing, but it is actually a big issue for some of our older citizens. Wondering about clearing the pathways. Is this something that the block coordinators could take on proactively? And that could be one of the things we identify in addition to who has gloves and extra Lysol?
Sharing of tools and skills doesn't matter what circumstance. So absolutely, I know anecdotally that certain neighborhoods via Nextdoor or their email list or whatever channels they've been using have done that. And in some cases, it's through the respective NPC, neighborhood preparedness coordinator. So certainly something that we can foster more of through the ESV program.
Not important, but the next time you communicate with everybody, that'd be great. And then the final thing just is on the budget. Mr. Shikata, thank you again for continuing to preview what it'll be like. I know Councilmember Niss spoke about being kind last week, and I had a quote a few weeks ago about being kind and also having courage. And I'm confident that we will need courage when we address the budget. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Du Bois.
Yeah, thank you. I'll try to be quick here. So I saw on the item 3A questions and response that there are some city staff that have childcare impacts. Do we expect any of our city staff to use the care.com service?
Well, thank you for mentioning that. We are rolling out a partnership with care.com really as an offering, basically an option for both our employees as well as in particular members of the community that might have some background in childcare or simply babysitting, including college kids that may be now back. And so just the platform that it provides is one that would enable matching between parents and families that need childcare and both volunteers as well as paid providers that might be in the area and interested in providing childcare for essential workers. So that's a creative partnership that again we're just launching this week. So that's one key component of it. In terms of other issues that our employees have been identifying, that's certainly one, and it could apply even on a partial day, as has been noting. We've learned that we've needed to be very flexible as an employer in order to accommodate time periods that families need to focus on the homeschooling, and then work can, to the extent that it can, flex around the clock as well. So the flexibility is the key, and at the same time, the FFCRA introduces another level of responsibility really for both parents as well as the employer. So we're working through the particulars of that.
Yeah, I was my question is really around the administrative leave. Like I guess a certain number of employees had childcare issues. So I just wondered if you thought that might help those employees.
It really could, yes.
Okay. And then the other thing, two things from last week's meeting. On Coverly, I know I sent you some private messages, but I just wanted to say from the whole council that I think there might be an opportunity, rather than just deferring rent for some of the leaseholders, to see if we could potentially look at some rent moratoriums and share some of that pain with the school district, or rent reduction. Very concerned about all these different groups who are just incurring debt that they have to pay back at some future time.
We've raised the issue, so it's in conversation. Yes,
and then the second one was, I think most public transportation has changed its schedule, And I think it'd be interesting maybe at a future meeting to see like what is the shuttle being used, and could we use it in a more socially distance friendly way for trips to the doctor or whatever might be needed for, you know, certain members of the community.
Sure, it might be helpful. I think Philip is prepared to perhaps give a quick snapshot on where we are with the shuttle, and could certainly follow up with more detail in the future date. So Philip?
Hi, yes, thanks again. So yeah, the shuttle is currently operating on its regular schedule, and it's carrying in the 20s to 30s passengers per day. Typically in the 20s, where it's around 2 passengers per trip. So it's not really high usage, but we do believe that those passengers are using it either for essential trips or to get to essential work. The provider, Transmetro, that provides our service is sterilizing, or I should say cleaning the buses with sterilizing chemicals each day. Sanitizing, thank you. And and they have information that's posted throughout the bus to make sure that people are keeping distance on the bus. So, you know, should you desire to either reduce service or halt service, those are options that we have available. But I will say that I do believe that it is still providing an essential service to some people that really do not have other means of getting to places.
Yeah, great. That's a useful update. And again, if the volume were low enough, you know, there might be other ways we could provide those people transportation that could be more cost effective, but just something to keep in mind. It doesn't have to go to zero. It could be point to point or Uber vouchers or whatever.
Yeah, so
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, if I can, I believe that providing Uber vouchers, and we actually talked about potentially providing on-demand service. We believe it would actually induce demand, cause more demand, and thus provide actually a higher cost instead of reducing cost. So I do think that would give me some concern in order to do that. I think the other thing is we should keep in mind is as we reduce service or stop service, that we might have concerns about bringing the service back online. So that's not to say that we shouldn't consider either of those things. It's just things we should consider as we're looking at this service.
And then since you're on, yeah, I am interested in hearing about some of the road closing ideas.
Yeah,
it does seem like you can pretty much bike anywhere right now. Like traffic is not an issue. So, but we can wait if you're going to bring that back at a later point.
Yeah, I'll bring it back. Actually, I wanted to share one more thing is that Oakland, you know, it was pretty widely announced that they were going to be separating 74 miles of bikeway throughout the city to bikes. And it was really exciting, actually, because I live in Oakland. I actually live very close to one of those bikeways. So I was really excited to go see it. But what I found out is actually right now they're only piloting 4 streets. So they've done kind of a limited rollout. The streets are not anywhere near me. So I was able to find pictures off of Twitter and kind of see what they were doing. But it's not quite as large in the scale that they're rolling it out with actual barricades that's closing the streets to through traffic. But what they're saying is we're designating those streets as through traffic or local traffic only. So, you know, it's just something to consider as we bring back. But we are planning on selecting some streets that we think would be really strategically important to separate for local traffic and bicycles and pedestrians only.
Cool. And then the last one, I think we, you know, we've heard that the RVs are down about 50%, which is pretty interesting. I think it indicates that there were a large number of workers living in RVs who maybe have gone home. But I do want to suggest that might be a good time to reach out to the homeless that are still here to really understand their needs. It's kind of an opportunity for the people that are still in RVs to understand kind of what their situation is, if that's possible. So, thanks.
Councilmember Koo.
Actually, the Vice Mayor has mentioned my topic, so I will pass. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Filseth.
I already asked 2 questions.
Okay. I'll just go quickly. So yeah, definitely, I sent you guys that article about Oakland, and I think one thing they're doing there is they're using citizen volunteers to enforce it, actually. Don't know if that's a model we need to follow, but interested in it. Thank you, Councilmember Cormack, for bringing up the traffic issue again. I think we've all seen that. On the gardeners issue, one thing we are, obviously it's prohibited under the county's order. But as our chief has mentioned multiple times, first they're educating and then they're enforcing. I think that's appropriate given the nature of that situation. Last thing I just want to get out there is on the health data. The county, I believe, a few days ago began publishing city by city statistics of COVID-19 infections. And so a few things there I just think are worth sharing. So we did look into it, and it is resident. So that means Palo Alto, I think now the count is 60 or 61 infected residents. It's not people who, may be at the hospitals or things like that. So actually residents who reside in Palo Alto. But it's only tracking infections. And so it's not saying these people were necessarily very ill or very sick. As you know, I think a large portion of the infections are asymptomatic. So they could be tracking that as well. But I am in contact with the county to try and figure out, can we get any more definition around that in terms of like age profiles, or is it a certain area in Palo Alto or institution, things like that. I think that's about it from my perspective. I'll note we're about 40 minutes behind schedule. We still have a couple big items. So Mr. City Manager, anything else to wrap up?
No, that covers it. Thank you for the feedback, and we'll keep at it.
Great.
Mayor, fine. This is Beth.
Yep.
We have some attendees. Do you want to see if they want to speak to this item?
Thank you for the reminder. We should have done that earlier. I really appreciate that. Sure. If city staff could go through the attendees we have, and if any of them wish to speak, let's go through that. And each of them shall have 2 minutes, please.
If any public speakers wish to speak, please raise your hand using the raise your hand icon on your computer. Mr. Mayor, I don't see any hands coming up.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And I think for people who are dialing in, it's *6 or *9. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Well, let's move on to the next item, the annual Earth Day report and study session.
All right. Mr. Eggleston, ready to go.
I am.
The floor is yours.
Okay. Good evening, Mayor Fine and City Council. I'm Brad Eggleston, Director of Public Works. Before we begin our presentation on the study session, I would like to acknowledge the unprecedented circumstances that are created by the coronavirus. We have 2 items on sustainability this evening: the Earth Day report that looks back at progress made towards the city's sustainability goals last year in 2019, and this year's upcoming sustainability work plan. So it's certainly unusual to be having these discussions during the coronavirus emergency, but on the other hand, addressing climate change remains a very important priority, and we do plan to continue this work as best we can under the circumstances that we find ourselves in currently. I did want to call out that we have a number of cross-departmental team members of the city's sustainability leadership team in the meeting and available to answer your questions this evening. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our Sustainability Manager, Christine Luong, who will give the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Brad. This is Christine Luong. I'm Sustainability Manager. As you all know, City of Palo Alto has an overarching goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions 80% below our 1990 levels by 2030. And as Brad mentioned, these are the team leads from all of our SCAP areas, the Sustainability and Climate Action Plan areas, which we sometimes refer to as the SCAP. And all of the team leads are on the line today to answer questions at the end of this presentation. So unlike previous years, we do not have an updated greenhouse gas inventory to show you. Normally, we would show you a chart like this of our greenhouse gas emissions. However, this year's Earth Day report is going to be primarily a 2018 to 2020 Sustainability Implementation Plan Progress Report. For the first time, we are going to have a consultant, AECOM, assist us with completing our 2019 greenhouse gas inventory. The full results of the 2019 greenhouse gas inventory will be included in the 2020 Sustainability and Climate Action Plan City Council study session that we hope to have in the early fall. And every year, the City of Palo Alto reports on our climate-related data to the CDP, or the Carbon Disclosure Project. And for the second year in a row, the City of Palo Alto made the A list for not only implementing a climate action plan, but also for making progress toward achieving our climate goals. And while we're motivated by our progress to keep striving for more, we're not done yet. The hardest part is yet to come, figuring out the actions we need to take to get us to our 80 by 30 goal. So in 2019, sustainability and climate change was a council priority, and we'd like to review some of the project highlights from 2019. So here we have our progress snapshot for energy. In November 2019, council unanimously adopted an all-electric mandate for residential new construction projects, which went into effect on April 1st, 2020. All electric homes are cheaper to build and operate over the lifetime of the building and helps the city meet its greenhouse gas reduction goal. The all electric mandate currently doesn't apply to existing buildings, which represents a much larger share of carbon emissions, but staff is working on options to present council for potentially extending this mandate to cover significant remodel projects. We also initiated a multifamily building gas furnace retrofit pilot. We launched an induction cooktop loaner program with Actera, and the City of Palo Alto's regional water quality control plant replaced the city's facility with the largest energy use, the sewage sludge incinerators, with a more environmentally friendly sludge dewatering and truck loadout facility. The updated treatment process will reduce greenhouse gas emissions by approximately 16,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year, which is about the equivalent of taking 3,500 passenger cars off the road. This is a little more than we anticipated and more than what we reported in the Earth Day report. And as you can see, the picture on the right is the city's sewage solids gas-fed incinerators being shut down permanently. And the picture on the left is the new dewatering technology that replaced the incinerators. So in regards to our key performance indicators for energy, the percent electric efficiency savings is the total electric savings in kilowatt hours from energy efficiency programs and Palo Alto's energy reach code expressed as a percentage of the city's total electric use. So in FY19, that was 0.61%, or the equivalent of 853 California homes' total power use in a year. And the percent gas efficiency savings is the total gas savings in therms from energy efficiency programs and Palo Alto's energy reach code expressed as a percentage of the city's total gas use. So for FY19, that was 0.44%, or the equivalent of 148 passenger vehicles taken off the road for a year. The city did not meet the council adopted energy efficiency goals for FY19, and we're not on track to meet the FY20 goals either. Since the standards for energy efficiency have been raised to such a high level, incremental efficiency savings are really difficult to achieve. For avoided natural gas use due to electrification programs, that number was 6,008 therms. Large decreases in natural gas use are needed to achieve our 80 by 30 goal. And while gas efficiency will play a part in reducing emissions, building electrification will need to play an even larger role, even though it is one of the more expensive forms of greenhouse gas reduction available. And the city did not meet its targets for 2019 due to several factors, mostly involving higher expenses for retrofitting gas appliances in existing buildings and higher operational costs of heat pump equipment. For both efficiency savings and natural gas use, we're looking to the 2020 Sustainability and Climate Action Plan update to look for ways to improve the amount of progress we make so that we can achieve our 80 by 30 goal. And moving on to mobility. Transportation has consistently been a top city council priority in some form or another for the last 6 years or so, and will continue to be a priority for 2020. Some project highlights for mobility include, in response to the increasing prominence of mobility issues in Palo Alto and throughout the region, transportation resources and functions have been transitioned to a separate Office of Transportation, moving out as a division of the Planning and Community Environment Department, which is now the Planning and Development Services Department. We participated in and advocated for regional transit programs. We increased active transportation mode share for school commutes. Active transportation being any self-propelled, human-powered mode of transportation, such as walking, biking, or rolling to get from one place to another. And in Palo Alto, high school bike commuting went from 12% in 2001 to 51% in 2019, which is quite remarkable. Building a sustainable transportation system also requires thoughtful planning around housing. Building housing near transit, for example, can reduce vehicle miles traveled. And Council adopted the Housing Work Plan Implementation Ordinance on April 1st, 2019. And this is me at last year's Earth Report study session when we were all meeting in person. And that's my active transportation first last mile commute solution. So road transportation, as you know, is Palo Alto's greatest single source of greenhouse gas emissions, which includes local trips as well as commute trips. So since 2015, we've seen a 15% reduction in single occupancy vehicle trips to downtown Palo Alto. We've seen a 3% increase in ride shares in downtown and a 21% increase in transit ridership in downtown. And we've seen an increase in commute benefits participation by city employees by an additional 60 employees participating. The Palo Alto's Federal Transportation Administration Fair Value Commuting Demonstration Project launched a pilot program in 2019 to improve employee participation in available commute benefits. The pilot included the creation of a commute concierge to assist staff with navigating and utilizing available commute benefits, which may have led to the increase in staff commute benefits participation. So for electric vehicles, we drafted a 3-year EV work plan to increase EV adoption. We presented that to the Utilities Advisory Commission in September 2019. Palo Alto was also awarded a $1 million Cal EV IP grant for electric vehicle charger installations at commercial properties, including nonprofits, multifamily, and mixed-use buildings. The city identified a replacement strategy to expand electric vehicle deployment in city fleet and added an F-150 Hybrid XL and 2 Chevy Bolts. The Bay Area's first all-electric refuse collection truck completed its 2nd year of service. The electric truck has saved about 6,000 gallons of diesel fuel and reduced 78 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalents per year. We completed a customer survey on EV adoption barriers, which found that 70% of surveyed responders who don't drive an electric vehicle say that they would be extremely interested in getting one if they knew that electric vehicle charging was readily available. And we co-sponsored workshops and ride and drive events for more than 400 customers. So as I just mentioned, road transportation currently accounts for the largest portion of the community's remaining greenhouse gas emissions. In Palo Alto, 29% of new vehicles purchased in Palo Alto in 2017 was an electric vehicle, which is the highest adoption rate in the country. For point of comparison, in 2017, the electric vehicle market share for new vehicles in all of California was about 5%. So we're doing quite well on that regard. Based on vehicle registration data from the DMV and the California Air Resources Board vehicle counts, there was an estimated 4,500 electric vehicles registered in Palo Alto at the end of 2019, which translates to about 7% EV penetration. And that translates to an estimated 10,800 10,800 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent avoided. And not surprisingly, 62% of the electric vehicles sold in Palo Alto in 2017 were Teslas. So moving on to water, the Regional Water Quality Control Plant is a local source of drought-proof sustainable water, only a small fraction of which is currently being used for irrigation and toilet flushing. In November 2019, Council approved a partnership agreement with the Santa Clara Valley Water District and the City of Mountain View to design and construct a saltwater removal facility at the Regional Water Quality Control Plant, which gives Valley Water the option to acquire about half of the treated wastewater produced by the Regional Water Quality Control Plant, and for Palo Alto to have a future option for water supply. In May 2019, City Council accepted a green stormwater infrastructure plan, which outlines how the city intends to transform its stormwater infrastructure. And related to the requirements of the green stormwater infrastructure plan, staff develops a policy to integrate GSI and sustainability in city policies, plans, and the capital improvement process. And we'll be rolling that out hopefully later this year. And finally, Palo Alto, in collaboration with the Valley Water District, developed a Northwest County Recycled Water Strategic Plan to identify the best potable and non-potable options for water reuse in the Regional Water Quality Control Plant service area. So, as you know, water is a limited resource in California, and its availability is affected by drought and will be further impacted by climate change and potential changes to the state water system. So per capita potable water use, which is gallons per capita per day, decreased from 2018 to 2019, but it's still not as low as 2017 when it was 134. For a percent recycled water use capacity, or the percent of the recycled water capacity we're actually using, it decreased slightly, but we are working on programs and initiatives to increase this. So when the 2016 Sustainability and Climate Action Plan framework was adopted by Council, staff anticipated the need to update the Sustainability and Climate Action Plan in 2020, since the work plan only goes through the end of 2020. In order to continue progress towards our climate and sustainability goals and targets, staff has started a 2020 Sustainability and Climate Action Plan update. And while the 2018 to 2020 Sustainability Implementation Plan focused on only 4 areas of activity of energy, mobility, electric vehicles, and water, the 2020 Sustainability and Climate Action Plan update proposes to include those 4 areas and then add climate adaptation and sea level rise, natural environment, and zero waste. So for climate adaptation and sea level rise, some of the highlights from 2019 include Council adopted a sea level rise adaptation policy in March 2019. Staff released an RFP for sea level rise adaptation consultant services in November 2019, and we hope that services will include a vulnerability assessment, development of a sea level rise adaptation plan, community engagement and public meetings, tool development and an education strategy, and research and technical guidance. A horizontal levee is a gently sloped, irrigated, and vegetated flood control levee along a shoreline, which provides key transitional habitat, storm surge attenuation, and wastewater polishing. A preliminary design for a Palo Alto horizontal levee pilot project was completed in 2019. The Regional Water Quality Control Plant new primary outfall project includes a new outfall pipeline to convey treated effluent to the bay, as well as rehabilitation of the existing 52-year-old outfall pipe and pump replacement for effluent discharge to Renzel Marsh. And finally, during heavy rainfall, stormwater runoff flows from 3 creeks towards the bay, where it's detained by the surrounding earthen levee and tide gates known as the Palo Alto Flood Basin. The existing tide gate was built by Valley Water in 1956 and is in need of repair. The new tide gate will be made adaptable to sea level rise scenarios. Sustainability is not only about mitigation, adaptation, and resilience, but also regeneration, which is identifying opportunities for renewal, restoration, and growth of our natural resources and environment. For natural environment, City of Palo Alto Utilities was recognized with the Tree Line USA Award by the National Arbor Day Foundation for the 5th year in a row. Palo Alto City Council approved the Urban Forest Plan 2nd edition in February 2019. Record tree planting and pruning of 36,000 public trees provided nearly $18 million in benefits. This is just one example of the carbon bank of plants, soil, and water-based organisms. And further quantification work is planned in conjunction with the implementation of the enterprise GIS system. And finally, continued development of an initiative to plant up to 10,000 trees in South Palo Alto. And here's a picture of a creek cleanup, which enhances the ecosystem. Reducing the amount of waste discarded in landfills is another important strategy for both greenhouse gas reduction and overall sustainability. Getting to the 95% diversion by a 2030 goal for zero waste will require refinement of existing programs, the adoption of new policies and programs, and working with businesses and residents that purchase products that will eventually become waste. The 2018 Zero Waste Plan identified actions that have the potential to divert over 15,000 tons of waste from landfill and reduce greenhouse gas emissions by almost 39,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. So in June 2019, Council approved one of the region's strictest restrictions on plastics with a new ordinance to ban disposable foodware items to reduce plastics in the environment and waterways. A key component of the foodware packaging reduction initiative of the 2018 Zero Waste Plan is to reduce the amount of disposable single-use foodware packaging generated in Palo Alto. Deconstruction, which is the careful disassembly of building components to maximize reuse and recycling, became a new ordinance in June 2018. Through the new ordinance, valuable materials that would have been destroyed by traditional demolition will be recovered for reuse and increased diversion. And the Household Hazardous Waste Program expanded and held an inaugural reopening celebration of its Household Hazardous Waste Reuse Zone. On the left is a photo of Girl Scout Troop 60016 from May of 2018 with then Mayor Niss. This is the Last Straw campaign spurred the movement that resulted in our disposable foodware ordinance. And on the right is a photo of Assistant Director of Public Works Phil Boble and then Mayor Phil Seth at the ribbon cutting ceremony for the reopening of the Household Hazardous Waste Reuse Zone. So for 2020, sustainability in the context of climate change and improving mobility for all are 2020 Council priorities. In 2020, our goal is to reinvigorate sustainability as a core value by integrating it into our programs and operations. Staff prepared a 2020 to 2021 sustainability work plan and launched the 2020 Sustainability and Climate Action Plan update, which, as Brad mentioned earlier, we'll be discussing later this evening. We'd like to thank you for your time, and we are happy to answer any questions you may have about the Earth Day report.
Cool. Thank you very much. Nice little ending slide here. Just want to thank staff, and let's go to members of the public if they have any comments on this study session, and then we'll come back to council.
If you wish to speak on this item, please raise your hand. I see a hand from David Page. You have 2 minutes to speak.
Concerned about the crisis at hand. But as you know, the climate is also in crisis, maybe a much more gradual problem than the COVID crisis. But what I'm hoping to do is to encourage all of you to do more and do it sooner in terms of preventing the much bigger problem that's coming down the road. I realize that at this time, the city is appropriately concerned about your budget. And so I sent in a SCAP feedback from David Page, if you look for it in your email. A couple of the pages that I sent in this rebuttal to the SCAP update concern how the city can save money and cut pollution both at the same time. Some of these ideas are speculative. I'm not a budget expert, but my idea was to stimulate the thinking amongst your well-qualified staff to see if there's other types of ways that the city can cut pollution and save money at the same time. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Susan Chamberlain. Susan, you'll have 2 minutes to speak.
Thank you. I'm speaking on behalf of the 350 Silicon Valley Palo Alto City team. And we have been looking carefully at the SCAP and have convened a couple of Zoom meetings with local community members to urging them to weigh in on the SCAP. We applaud the climate goal of 80% reduction by 2030, but feel like the current plan is not likely to meet those goals. It needs to be much more aggressive. And in particular, we need to have specific targets that directly connect the goals to actions to measurable results. For example, to reduce our natural gas footprint in line with our goal, we need to know how many heat pump water heaters are required to be installed each year in Palo Alto homes. And similarly, if we want if 70% of employees who commute in single occupancy vehicles would work from home several days a week, we need to know how that will impact our greenhouse gas calculations. Here are a few additional recommendations. That we have more robust support for the TMA, incentivize EV adoption, zone for denser housing near transit, standardize building codes with other cities, and streamline the electrification permitting process, lower fees for electrification permits, and enact effective communication programs to educate residents for ultra-low carbon lifestyles. Thank you very much.
Dwayne, you're our next speaker. You have 2 minutes.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, Dwayne.
Hi. I wasn't prepared.
Your hand was up to speak. Confirm you do not want to speak right now?
No, not right now.
Okay, thank you. Ben, you have 2 minutes to speak. Ben, did you want to speak? Mayor, that appears to be all the speakers.
Okay, thank you very much.
Actually, there's actually a couple others that just may have just come in.
Hi, I tried to speak on the phone, but it didn't seem to work. This is Arthur Keller, and I can't seem to sync my phone with my video, which worked on Zoom for other people on other calls, but not on this call. I have a couple things to talk about. Firstly, congratulations to the city for adopting all electric homes for new home construction. Unfortunately, city staff undercut that with starting a pre-application process so people can get in under the wire. Excuse me? I said city staff undercut that with having a process for a pre-application process, so that those people who hadn't completed their applications could still not have electric homes. So those homes will be here 50 years or longer, not electric. Housing near transit is an interesting concept, but more people who live in Palo Alto actually take bicycle than all forms of transit combined. So don't expect much car reductions from housing near transit. With electric vehicles, we should reconvene the electric vehicle task force. We should think about, with this kind of penetration, having 100% of all parking spaces have a conduit.
Fuck up. Shut the fuck
Somebody's speaking over me. I'm not sure who that is.
Shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck up.
Whoever's doing that, that is completely unacceptable. You know, we're trying to conduct a public meeting here. Mr. Keller, we'll save you some time. Can we please mute everybody except Mr. Keller?
Yes, they've been muted.
Thank you. Arthur, if you'd please continue, and we'll give you a little bit of extra time at the end. I'm sorry for that.
I think Arthur's been muted. I think he's the top one.
I'm now unmuted. Thank you. So what I was going to say is that because of the desire for penetration of electric vehicles of 50% and more beyond 2030, we should have 100% of the parking spaces have conduit for when you build parking garages. It's very cheap to put in conduit. When you put in the parking garage, much more expensive later on. Also, we should publicize the low-income Bay Area Air Quality Management District plan called Clean Cars for All, which promotes clean vehicles for those people who are of low income. And finally, with respect to sea level rise, we should work with Valley Water and the Army Corps of Engineers and the state agencies. With respect to it, I understand a contract was signed in September of 2019 between those parties to study sea level rise adaptation for Palo Alto and perhaps for Sunnyvale, to do a study on that with construction probably in the 2030 to 2035 timeframe if all goes according to plan. So the staff should be monitoring that and reporting that to the council and the public. Thank you.
Ben, it's your turn to speak. You have 2 minutes.
Hi, miss. Hello?
Would you like to speak on this item?
How many more speakers do we have here?
It looks like 3. Some of them are not unmuting.
Okay, let's just go through them, but I think some of these are not real, unfortunately.
Hello. Hello. I have a question. Nigger. Praise cack.
All right. Beth, unless you see anyone else who you think is legitimate, I think we're going to end public comment on this.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you for those who had something to contribute. Let's go back to council. I see Councilmember Philsett's hand first.
Thank you very much. I got a question for, I guess, Christine. And it's really sort of the same question that Susan Chamberlain started to ask, which is, it seems like we're doing all this good stuff, and yet we're hearing we're short of our goal. And so, you know, is there in fact a giant spreadsheet somewhere that says, okay, you know, here's where we are today, okay, and here's where we need to be, and here's the quantitative relationship between those things. You know, here's how many EVs it's going to take. Here's how many water heaters it's going to take. Here's how many people we need to get using bicycles instead. Because right now it seems like what we've had so far is kind of a lot of good stuff, and then this 80-30 goal, and sort of something happens in between and we're not sure what. So is there a giant spreadsheet somewhere that actually lays all that out?
This is Brad. I'll take a crack at that. There are spreadsheet tools that were used for developing the initial SCAP, and they made a lot of different assumptions about the programs that we have in place and what those would accomplish. But what they didn't do was set out year-by-year goals for what needed to happen to necessarily stay on track. And then many assumptions for things like fuel efficiency for vehicle miles traveled and things like that were static and not updated. So really where we are as we head into the 2020 SCAP update, I think it was mentioned in Christine's presentation that we have AECOM on board as a consultant. They're going to be taking a fresh look and doing the analysis both on the programs that we have in place as to where those are taking us, and more importantly, the new ideas that we're getting as we engage staff and the community at starting out the SCAP update process. So really it's in the next months as we begin that work, have our community engagement process, and then come back, as Christine mentioned, in early fall for the City Council study session that we're going to have more information to share with you on that.
Okay, thanks very much. You know, year by year, you know, that would be incredible. Right? I think that would be awesome. But I mean, just having, here's how much, I think would be really important. Okay, even without even the number of years involved, because you know we say we're at 7% EV penetration in the city of Palo Alto. You know, sounds good, but is it good? I mean, is it enough, or probably not? You know, where do we actually need to get to? I mean, if we get to 15, is that enough? Is 25 enough? Is 85? I mean, where do we need to get to? And I think, you know, it's sort of hard to manage what you can't measure. And so I think, you know, I would love to see something a little more quantitative going forward if we're going to take this stuff seriously. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember Filseth. Next, I see Councilmember Cormack. And to my council colleagues, please hit the raise hand button if you'd like to speak.
Thank you, Mayor Fine. Councilmember Filseth has anticipated both of my questions, but I want to spend a little bit more time on them. I wonder, Ms. Luong, if you could put the bar graph up again that was in the presentation. And while you're doing that, I'll just say, I don't know if we're on track. Last year, I remember asking this exact question, like, are we on track? And at least we had, you know, a line that went down on the farther side, and we could see where we were headed, and that transportation and electrification of buildings was required. So, you know, of course it's an emergency, and I want to honor what Director Eggleston said at the beginning of his remarks. Nevertheless, I would have anticipated seeing a graph this evening that was similar to the one we saw last year, which extended its way down so we could see where we were headed. Really hard to know if we're on track. And then the second question was the same question I asked last time, is are we doing enough? And, you know, I think Councilmember Filseth also touched on that. And I think we can defer that to item 4, but you know, there are just a number of things that members of the public have brought up, and then I know staff is interested in, and setting goals on that, I think is going to be important. AECOM, when they come forward with a recommendation, hopefully there'll be a range of scenarios that will help us, assess what changes we need to make going forward. I know that I appreciate all the members of the public who sent in comments today. I will say that with this level of detail, sending them at 4:30 makes it a little bit hard for all of us to absorb all of your comments, but we certainly did the best we could, and we thank you for that level of detail, which I expect to see going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Cormack. Next, I have Vice Mayor Du Bois.
Yeah, happy Earth Day, everybody. A little early, but thanks for the update. Yeah, now I'll save a lot of the specific comments, I think, for the SCAP item. Just a couple of high-level questions. The first one is really around energy. It's a super dynamic environment. I mean, the growth of renewable energy over the last 10 years has been incredible. I don't think anybody could have forecasted it accurately. And so, when we talk about are we on track or not on track, I mean, how are we forecasting energy for the future for the next 10 years? And that seems like a really hard thing to do. And I'm just curious how staff approaches that.
Christine Tam, could you take that question, please?
Good evening, council members. So regarding to the future load forecast, we have been, our staff has been updating our current
I'm sorry, Christine. Yeah, it wasn't about the load. It was really about production and the cost of energy and the cleanliness of energy. Like, it's changed a lot in the last 10 years. Do we expect it to just get better and cheaper going forward?
Our energy contracts actually are long-term contracts. So when we enter into a renewable energy contracts, these are 10, 15-year contracts. So we do have pretty accurate forecasts going out to 2030 for the cost of our electricity portfolio.
Okay, thank you. And then the other question really wasn't really a question, more of a comment, I guess, just about our tree canopy. I mean, it's always good to see the benefits of those trees, and just making sure we're doing enough to protect and extend our canopy. And then the last question was really, again, we see mobility or transportation as kind of the big bucket that's left. That data we saw was from 2017. So what is the source, and can we track our progress better? Do we think we're doing substantially better in April 2020 than we're showing in the report even?
I can address one part of the question. This is Brad, and then I'll ask Sylvia Starlack to comment further. So in terms of the reductions that are seen because of the adoption of electric vehicles in Palo Alto, those emissions reductions have been built into the inventories we're doing, just basically looking at the number of vehicles, typical miles traveled for an average vehicle, and the fact that that Palo Alto has carbon neutral electricity. And maybe on the overall VMT and mobility, Sylvia could speak a little further to that.
Trying to get my camera to start, sorry. Hello? Am I on?
You're on, Sylvia.
Okay. Thank you. I was saying Brad. So regarding data around mobility, we are using the downtown commute survey that is provided to us by the TMA. We are hoping to improve our data collection around mobility.
But the EV ownership in Palo Alto, was that from that data source?
No, sorry. The EV ownership came directly from the DMV.
Okay, it just seemed like it was from 2017. So I just wondered if we had newer information.
Brad or Christine might be able to answer that question. I think The request was made within the prior year, so it was probably the latest data that the DMV could give us.
I believe the EV penetration data that we're showing is for 2019.
Okay, great.
The 2017 data was new electric vehicle sales.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you guys. Appreciate the update.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Mayor. Next, I see Councilmember Niss.
Did. So a couple of thoughts. Someone may want to comment on this, but has anyone noticed that the sky is a different color? You have, I can tell.
Yes, very much so.
So it's rather astonishing to see what happens when what pollutes most of our air is gone. It's really stunning. And while I agree, Allison, those cars are driving way too fast, and it's really just it's really distressing. The color of the sky is absolutely amazing. The air quality today was amazing. If you look back on where we were in the fire last year, or even just recently in the winter, it is some of the best we have ever seen. And it's just wonderful to have that right in our backyard. Go out to the Baylands, by the way, it's absolutely stunning. So secondly, looking at the number of EVs, who was it who was talking about EVs? One of our staff. Somebody out there? EVs.
It was Christine Wong.
Okay, Christine, are you there? I can see your name. There you are. So talking about EVs, because you're saying that the number of EVs we have really exceeds that of the other Bay Area cities. I heard you correctly, right? And so I'd be interested in knowing, because we're in a Tesla town, do we see, well, I say anecdotally, I see more Teslas than anything else, but is that just my perception or not?
That is not your perception. 62% of new electric vehicle sales, out of the new electric vehicle sales in 2017, 62% were Teslas. So that is, yeah.
Doesn't that seem astonishing to you? I mean, it just seems rather amazing. I feel a little embarrassed that I'm still driving a Prius. I may have to switch. So, and lastly, talking about the trees, I think that our trees are really amazing. So I don't remember if you had a number for the number of South Palo Alto trees that was going to go in. Did you, and perhaps I missed it or not?
I believe it's in the report, Councilmember Niss, that we're talking about an eventual goal of adding 10,000 trees in South Palo Alto.
Do you know where we are at this point, though?
The progress is slow. It's more on the order of a couple hundred trees per year, if I'm remembering correctly. Right. Mainly through a program we're working on with Canopy. Yeah. This is more difficult.
Right.
It's more difficult than other areas in the city because most of these sites are on private property. So it's a matter
the sidewalks tend to be rolled. So I just wanted to say that because people ask about trees all the time and they say, you know, we don't have enough trees in South Palo Alto. And I think we need to make that explanation clear that it's not for lack of wanting to do that, but there are more challenges than in some of the other parts of town. Would you nod if that's correct?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Okay, that does it, Adrian. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Niss. Councilmembers Koo or Tanaka, I haven't seen lights from you. If you'd like to speak. None from Lydia. Greg? No? Okay. Some quick comments. Agree with most of my colleagues on this. Thank you very much for the update, and happy Earth Day, or early. And, you know, this is kind of the looking back report, and in a little bit for our action item, we'll get to the looking forward about what we're going to do here in 2020 and going forward. One thing I'll mention is I do appreciate staff's mention of the importance of infill residential development. We are not going to reach our climate goals if we don't reach our housing goals. So I just encourage us all to keep that in mind. With that, what I'm going to suggest is we move on to or agenda changes, which I don't think we have any, correct, Mr. City Manager?
We do not.
Okay, we can go to oral communications and then maybe the consent calendar, and then we'll take a break if that sounds good.
Mayor, we have 2 speakers to speak. You want to give them 2 minutes?
Yes, please.
Dan Gordon, it's your turn. You have 2 minutes to speak.
Hi, everyone. I don't know if you can see me, but I appreciate the opportunity. I just want to let you know, I sent out an email after 32 years. I'm going to be out of the restaurant business in Palo Alto, and there are numerous reasons for it. Number one is clearly this has been a monumental decline in the city over the last, I'd say, 8 years, for numerous reasons. One is that just the nature and demeanor of the tech industry and how it's changed the consumer profile. The other is, rents and labor costs are just astronomical, and the rents were something that we can't manage. That was something we inherited. But labor costs, I don't know if you guys realize it, but in a period of 3.5 years, you have voted to increase labor costs 78% across the board, and that's an untenable scenario. So when the self-sheltering impact in Palo Alto started occurring, once the announcement came out in January, our already low sales dropped about 25% in January, another 35%, and then finally in March, even before the self-sheltering went on, it was down to 70%. So there's no way we can recover. There's no timeline for when it would make sense to reopen, and the oxygen tank is dry. I really wish it was possible through loans, PPP programs, but the one thing I would like to encourage you, I'm out of the business now, and I don't have any skin in the game, so to speak. But my colleagues in the restaurant business are thinking the same thing. And you have a chance to help reinstate a recovery, and that could be done by bringing the minimum wage to state levels immediately as soon as the sheltering in place is removed. The large group gatherings are another problem. Without Stanford, without people downtown, and with spacing that's going to reduce capacity and seating by 25%, it just isn't worth reopening a restaurant. And I'm not by myself. So if you want us to have open storefronts in the next 9 months, you're really going to have to start being proactive and working on brainstorming on what you can do for the business community locally to give them an incentive to want to reopen and hire people. It's really a tragic scenario. That was my comment. Thanks for the time.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Gordon. I just want to say on behalf of the broader community, thank you for your many decades of service and business in Palo Alto. I've certainly enjoyed a lot of good barbecue and beer at your place, and it's sad to see you guys go. But I'd encourage you and other business people in town to please keep on providing feedback to the city and the city council so that we can try and solve these big issues. But thank you so much, sir. Let's please go to the next speaker.
David Page, it's your turn. You have 2 minutes to speak.
Hi, thank you very much. I wanted to follow up on a few things that the council members mentioned just a moment ago. According to the selectively crafted records we saw in the slides earlier tonight, Palo Alto has not made any progress in the last few years in terms of the amount of pollution that's discharged into the air. Assuming we change the way the records are put together, perhaps emissions have gone up in the last few years. As you know, the devil's in the details in a lot of these things. One of the topics mentioned by the council was about electric vehicles. As far as I can tell, the reason there's so many EVs within Palo Alto is a lot because of people deciding to buy them for their own personal use and not necessarily based on what the city has done. This is, you know, expensive perhaps, but we shouldn't, the city shouldn't be taking credit for what the community is doing on its own, is my point. Finally, an example about how the city could change its budget around to decrease the amount of pollution. One obvious example would be the city travel budget. Presumably a large percentage of that is spent on airline tickets. Airlines cause a lot of pollution. If you delete the travel budget and you go to conferences and meetings by Zoom, then you create less pollution and you save money. All right, thank you very much.
Hello?
Who's our next speaker?
Hello, my name is Anthony. And I just wanted to make a reference to a comment that you said before. It's just a question, a quick one. You mentioned that housing, we will never meet our housing goals until we meet our climate goals. And I just wanted to ask you if you could give some more detail into that. That was it. That's just my question.
Thank you, sir. We're actually not allowed to respond to public commenters, but just send me an email and I'd be happy to chat.
That's the end of our speakers.
Okay, thank you very much, Beth. So that concludes oral communications, and let's move on to the consent calendar. We have two items, items 3 and 3A. Is there, well, first let's see, are there public commenters on the consent calendar? I see one hand up on the consent calendar. Is that correct?
Anthony, do you wish to speak on the consent calendar?
Can you hear me all right?
Anthony, do you want to speak on the consent calendar?
Yeah, actually, what's up with homosexuality rates in Palo Alto?
All right. So now the consent calendar comes back to council.
Actually, Mayor, if I might, there was one clarification we needed to make on a recommendation for 3A. I think the recommendation in the staff report is specific to the city manager, but the clarification is it should apply to all the council appointed officers.
Thank you. So when and if there's a motion on the consent calendar, let's incorporate that. With that, I'll move the consent calendar.
Second.
Thank you, Councilmember Cormack. Let's go alphabetically. So Councilmember Cormack.
Yes.
Actually, sorry, I was going to, before you take a vote, I was going to do a no on 3A.
Understood. Sorry, let me just get my bearings again. So Councilmember Cormack is a yes. Vice Mayor Du Bois.
Yes.
Myself is a yes. Councilmember Niss. Sorry, Councilmember Filseth, I went out of order.
I'm a yes too.
Thank you. Councilmember Niss. You're muted, Liz. I think you have to have a voice vote.
The motion's up in front of me, so hang on while I unmute.
Can you please restate your vote, Councilmember Niss? You're muted.
Yes.
Thank you. Councilmember Koo.
Yes.
Councilmember Tanaka.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So my math is right. The motion carries 7-0 with Councilmember Tanaka voting no on item 3A. Councilmember Tanaka, would you like to speak to your no vote?
Yeah, yes, definitely. So thank you for the staff report. I wrote some comments back to the responses that staff wrote, and I've asked Beth to forward that to you guys, along with some information that I got from fellow council members from other cities. So I have a quick summary here that I'll show you guys. Basically, I looked at Millbrae, Daly City, Cupertino, San Mateo, and for us with this motion that just passed, Palo Alto's giving about 105 paid leave days. You compare that to Millbrae, it's about 10 days. Daly City is about 15. Cupertino, they just furloughed all the part-time workers, so 80 part-time workers. And San Mateo has stopped all paid leave past 4/12, April 12th, today, actually yesterday. So that's kind of the research that I did, and in general, I actually wanted to really support this topic. I voted for it last time around, and I think the reason why it's on consent today is because we made the motion to have what is the total authorized dollar amount in the staff report, and I put that in my list of questions to ask, what is the total authorized dollar amount? I was told that my calculation using my very simple math was incorrect, and but there was no offers to what was the correct authorization amount of the dollars. So, right now it's a very, we're kind of in a very tough economic time. We're in a basic economic meltdown. A lot of residents have lost their jobs, lost their savings. Businesses like the one we just heard from Dan are going bankrupt. And we have a fiduciary duty when we approve things to know how much things are going to cost. And so a simple question like knowing what is the total authorization amount, I think is very important in making sure that we really look out for our residents, which is, I think, important. I mean, they should be our #1 priorities in the cities, making sure that they're taken care of. So I regret, even though I really want the employees to be taken care of, I want to make sure that they're made whole and all that. But I think it's important that we know what are we spending our money on? How much is it going to be? We don't know that. At least I don't know that now. So hopefully in future consent items, this could be taken care of. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we'll move to city manager comments, Mr. Shikara.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. No specific comments. I would just note that moving forward, certainly staff, on behalf of staff, I look forward to continuing to report to the council updates on what we're doing during this emergency period, as well as plans for the future.
Thank you so much, sir. Okay, I'm going to suggest we take a 10-minute break. So if we can all reconvene here at 8:50, and to members of the council, just please be sure to mute your connection. See you all in 10 minutes. Thank you. Thanks all for getting back on time. We'll give everybody a couple minutes to join again. I think we're just waiting on Liz, but since we have a bit of a presentation, why don't we get started with that? There's Liz.
All right, I think we're back to Brad.
Okay, good evening again, Brad Eggleston. So earlier this evening, not very long ago, we provided the progress report of the 2019 sustainability related activities. And now we're moving on to focus on the work that we're currently undertaking and projects to be initiated in the future. So I'm going to turn it over to Christine for this presentation in just a second. But before doing so, I just wanted to touch on, the council received a number of emails from the public commenting on both this item and the study session. A lot of those were received today and just in the last couple of days. What we're talking about tonight is the sustainability work plan that's based on the council priority for this calendar year, and also the overall SCAP update plan. And many of the comments that we've received were about the importance of doing more to make sure the city meets the 80 by 30 climate goals. So just wanted to say, these are the kinds of comments and ideas that we're soliciting through the SCAP update process that Christine's going to talk about. And we really appreciate the comments and ideas. And I just wanted to say up front as we enter into this that we'll be incorporating all of these thoughts into as input into the update process that we're undergoing. So with that, I'll turn it to Christine for the presentation.
Thanks, Brad. And once again, this is Christine Long, Sustainability Manager. I'll try to keep this brief and peppy since you're probably sick of hearing from me. So as Brad mentioned, in this presentation, we'll review the 2020 Sustainability and Climate Action Plan update process and the 2020 to 2021 Sustainability Work Plan. Our focus of the work plan is on 2020. The 2021 activities are draft and subject to change. So the 2020 to Sustainability and Climate Action Plan update process and the 2020 to 2021 Sustainability Work Plan were both drafted before the current pandemic. The global response to COVID-19 has highlighted the tools and strategies needed to be resilient in confronting the challenge together. We can use some of the same tools and strategies for resilience when addressing climate change impacts. We still don't know yet the full impact the pandemic will have on the economy, society, and city operations, but we do know that COVID-19 will undoubtedly impact both the 2020 Sustainability and Climate Action Plan update process and the 2020 to 2021 Sustainability Work Plan. Staff is going to do our best to keep moving items forward and stay on schedule, but we already know that some programs will be delayed. So this familiar chart again, as mentioned earlier this evening, this year's report did not include a 2019 greenhouse gas emissions inventory. This is the familiar chart that shows our 2018 overall greenhouse gas emissions from both Palo Alto municipal operations and community-wide emissions in metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, starting with our 1990 baseline, 2005 as a point of reference, and then the last several years of emissions data. Each different colored bar represents the various sources of emissions that contribute to our overall greenhouse gas emissions. And as a result of various city-led initiatives, programs, and activities focused on climate change and sustainability, by the end of 2018, Palo Alto reduced greenhouse gas emissions an estimated 36% from our 1990 baseline, despite a population increase of 20% during that same time period. And as shown in the chart, the red bar, road transportation, represents Palo Alto's largest remaining source of greenhouse gas emissions at about 64% of the remaining total, followed by natural gas use at 32% of the remaining emissions. The solid blue bar represents emissions from natural gas use, and the shaded blue bar represents Palo Alto green gas offsets. As a bridging strategy, carbon offsets are being purchased in an amount equal to the greenhouse gas emissions caused by natural gas use within the city. And you may have noticed that we're leading with emissions are down 36%, not the 56.5% with offsets. That is one of the comments we received from the public that we're implementing real time. So accounting for natural gas offsets has a dramatic effect on the city's overall greenhouse gas emissions, which is why we're presenting both the natural gas use as well as the offsets purchased. If we include natural gas offsets, greenhouse gas emissions are down about 56.5% from the 1999 baseline, and then road transportation becomes 94% of the remaining emissions. But as you can see, natural gas use hasn't really changed in the past few years. So while greenhouse gas emissions reductions is not the only goal of the Sustainability and Climate Action Plan, which we sometimes refer to as the SCAP, it's a major one. And to achieve the 80% reduction goal by 2030, Palo Alto will need to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by about 300,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent from the current emission level, or if you count offsets, about 150,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. So for the city to continue progress towards our climate and sustainability goals and targets, as we mentioned earlier, we're going to need to update our Sustainability and Climate Action Plan to further study the highest impact actions to take, and then we can answer some of the questions from Councilmember McCormick and Councilmember Salsa about what we need to do and the targets we need to get to our 80 by 30 goal. So as you know, we're launching our 2020 Sustainability and Climate Action Plan update to determine the goals and key actions that we need to meet our sustainability targets. And throughout the process, we'll be looking to the community to provide feedback on the various potential goals and key actions that the city can take to get us to our 80 by 30 target. We'll also be looking to council to provide guidance and direction throughout the process. As you can see in the orange row, we've already provided a very brief informational report to council to outline the process. And even though it's not spelled out on this chart, we're including a brief overview of the 2020 Sustainability and Climate Action Plan update in this Sustainability Work Plan presentation. In preparation for the 2020 Sustainability and Climate Action Plan update, staff reviewed the goals and actions in the 2016 Sustainability and Climate Action Plan framework, the 2018 to 2020 Sustainability Implementation Plan, the 2018 Zero Waste Plan, the 2030 Comprehensive Plan, the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, Greenhouse Gas Reduction High Impact Practices, and the Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance Game Changers list to draft potential goals and key actions. And these potential goals and key actions are meant to be a starting point for discussion. They're not the final product, they're just a starting point for discussion as we gather community input on both the draft potential goals and the key actions, as well as what other goals and key actions we need to add to get us to our 80 by 30 goal. Each of the 7 SCAP areas will include SMART goals, which stands for specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely, as well as the key actions that we mentioned previously. As you can see in the blue row, we're currently working on our 2019 greenhouse gas inventory with the help of AECOM. And as you can see in the green row, we were scheduled to have a 2020 Sustainability and Climate Action Plan community workshop to start gathering community input on the potential goals and key actions. But due to the now familiar guidance from Santa Clara County to shelter in place, we restructured what was supposed to be an in-person workshop into a virtual workshop. We turned the community workshop into an 8-part pre-recorded on-demand webinar so that participants could view each part when they had time and are also able to provide feedback during the webinars that's recorded. The virtual workshop launched on March 31st and will close tomorrow evening. To date, we've had about 147 registered participants, And we're in the process of summarizing all the comments, both that came in directly through the chat box of the webinar, as well as comments that have been emailed to us. And we'll share all the feedback from the participants and post on our website by April 21st and begin to address all the comments. We've learned a lot from this first virtual workshop, and we'll be taking the lessons learned to improve future virtual engagement opportunities, which most likely will all be pre-recorded to avoid Zoom bombing and other glitches. So back to the proposed process. As you can see in the green row, we also plan on hosting an in-person 2020 Sustainability and Climate Action Plan Summit in the fall. Hopefully we'll be able to do that still. Some of the SCAP areas are going to require more in-depth discussion, and between now and then, staff will hold area-specific meetings to do a deeper dive on specific topics. Staff will also provide additional opportunities for online engagement to gain a better understanding of the community's concerns and vision around the 2020 Sustainability Climate Action Plan, as well as provide an opportunity for community members who can't attend the meetings to provide their input. And once we have gathered all the community input on the goals and key action and refined the goals and key actions, then AECOM will perform an impact analysis, as we referred to earlier. The impact analysis will detail the cost, expected greenhouse gas emissions reductions, and sustainability benefits. Staff will prepare a council study session in early fall to discuss the 2019 greenhouse gas inventory, the business as usual forecast, the results of the impact analysis, and the summary of the community input received to date. And at that point, we'll be able to give you more data and targets that you've been wanting to see tonight. We hope to get council's guidance on the potential goals and key actions so that at the 2020 Sustainability and Climate Action Plan Summit, hopefully in early fall, the community can help staff prioritize which of the key actions we need to do to get us to our 80 by 30 goal and other proposed goals. And while the 2020 Sustainability and Climate Action Plan is being drafted, AECOM will concurrently be preparing the California Environmental Quality Act environmental documents so that there will be a companion secret review of the 2020 Sustainability and Climate Action Plan. And we hope to come back to council around this time next year with a finished 2020 Sustainability and Climate Action Plan, hopefully for your approval. So just to give you a quick snapshot of what we're asking AECOM to help us with, AECOM will create a citywide greenhouse gas emissions inventory for 3 years, including providing a more accurate methodology for calculating our transportation-related emissions. And we'll be including airport emissions for the first time. We haven't done that before, so that we can comply with new reporting protocols. As well as to comply with new CEQA guidelines adopted last year, the city will need to make a series of decisions about how to change current transportation impact analysis from measuring impact to drivers and shift to measuring the impact of driving through the use of VMT or vehicle miles traveled. The city will need to adopt a VMT methodology and thresholds for CEQA purposes by July 1st of 2020, and staff will be discussing this with council in more depth at a later date. We don't have time tonight. AECOM will also calculate a business as usual forecast to show what emissions reductions will be achieved if we don't add any new policies or actions. And most importantly, AECOM will conduct an impact analysis on the draft actions to estimate the greenhouse gas reductions of the proposed actions, the estimated costs, the additional sustainability co-benefits, such as improved local air quality, preservation of habitat, reduced cost of living, or even reduced socioeconomic disparities. And the results of the impact analysis will help us further refine the goals and key actions needed to get to our 80 by 30 target. So as we mentioned earlier, 80 by 30 is our overarching sustainability goal, but we have several equally important goals in the following areas. We have a sustainability leadership team, which has representatives from 6 departments, and provides strategy and direction for sustainability strategy implementation. And as we mentioned before, these are the team leads for the 7 sustainability and climate action plan areas. They manage the corresponding working groups for each area and are also part of the sustainability leadership team. They're all still on the line tonight to answer any questions you might have about specific SCAP areas. So here is our 2020 to 2021 sustainability work plan. The full plan is in your packet, so we're not going to go through this very dense graphic, and instead I'm just going to highlight a few of the priority project examples. So some of the priority projects for 2020 include developing and implementing a utilities electrification work plan, adopting a transportation demand management ordinance, ensuring adequate and diverse electric vehicle charging infrastructure, implementing the city's first green stormwater infrastructure plan, developing a sea level rise adaptation plan, exploring programs and policies to provide local carbon storage and other environmental benefits through the urban forest, begin to enforce the disposable foodware ordinance and the construction ordinance to reduce waste, and to provide multiple opportunities for community input on the 2020 Sustainability and Climate Action Plan update. And a lot of these priority projects may be delayed due to the current pandemic. So our recommended motion for tonight is for council to accept the 2020 to 2021 Sustainability Work Plan. We thank you for your time. And once again, we are all on the line to answer your questions.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate that. I'd like to go to the public for any comments on this issue. So please do raise your hand if you'd like to speak on this issue, and the city clerk will take your comments in turn. Each of you will have 2 minutes. Beth, if you want to help me out with this, please.
Arthur Keller, it's your turn to speak. If you can go ahead, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. So firstly, we should implement a solar investment access ordinance that means that if you put solar panels on your roof, somebody can't build a building next to you to shade it. That will destroy your investment in your solar panels. We should look at the amount of reduction in greenhouse gases just from the incinerator retirement. That wasn't calculated. Also, with transportation demand management, we've had a lot of these programs in transportation demand management, but they have not actually been enforced. So we should start gathering them, inventorying them, and enforcing them. With respect to vehicle miles traveled versus, I think we should look at the amount of vehicle miles traveled that are decreased or increased based on adding an additional person living in Palo Alto, and also look in the vehicles miles traveled based on reducing a job in Palo Alto or taking several jobs and converting them to partly telecommuting. And with respect to level of service, the city's comprehensive plan also does include level of service which deals with local congestion within the city of Palo Alto as an issue to be considered along with vehicle miles traveled. And with respect to level of service, that deals with local congestion, and local congestion creates pollution within our city, both greenhouse gases and criteria pollutants. So we should basically retain level of service and do that in parallel with vehicle miles traveled as our comprehensive plan describes. Also, with respect, we should basically promote integrated pest management by providing input in utility inserts, as well as in reach out to homeowners associations and particularly condo associations. And in terms of our zero waste goal, we should promote composting with respect to our businesses and multifamily houses within Palo Alto, because I think that that will help a lot. Thank you very much.
David Page, it's your turn to speak. You have 2 minutes to speak.
Hi, thank you very much for allowing me to talk to you once again. I read through the SCAP update, and I sent in to each of you 7 pages via email about my rebuttal to the update. It's the subject line in the email is SCAP feedback by David Page. I hope you get a chance to look at it. As I mentioned earlier, a good chunk of it is about the budget, and it includes a whole bunch of different items that I don't have time to get into here tonight. But in general, I'd like to say the SCAP update is an embarrassment, and there's so little that Palo Alto has done, and so much that it's taken credit for, given the nature of the problem and the magnitude of the consequences that are headed in our direction. It's easy to criticize, it's easy to throw blame around, it's easy to use words like embarrassment. And I'm not intending to single out anyone. We're all in this together. You know, all of us create pollution, and what I'm hoping is the city can do something which wouldn't cost much money at all, which is simply to tell the truth about the nature of the problem, the consequences, the causes. This can be easily done by not by reinventing the wheel, but just by going to what the California Air Resources Board has already put together, which is their carbon footprint calculator that you could find at Cool California. Thank you very much. I hope you read my feedback letter, and thank you very much again.
I believe we have another David. Is that right, Beth?
David Cole, it's your turn to speak. You have 2 minutes.
Yes, hello, Mayor and City Council. Thank you very much for hearing me this evening and making this available. With all due respect to city staff, I've worked with them for many years now. If we look at the greenhouse gas emissions chart, bar chart, we'll see that it's been flatlined for the last 7 years, basically. And while the staff gives lots of great glowing numbers, they don't relate it back to the reductions that need to happen each year, which is what Council members Filsef and McCormick talked about. And we really need to have that kind of reporting based on the goal that we need to get to, not relative to our neighboring cities, because this is an absolute goal. It was set by good science and great models, just like the way that we're beating the coronavirus. We need to pay attention to the science here and act accordingly. What this would look like is we would have a number like, if we do the numbers back of the envelope, that's 2,300 heat pump water heaters that need to be changed out each year between now and 2030. It's 1,400 heat pump space heating systems. It's about 8,600 EVs that need to become, adopted each year. So we really need to step up to the task if we're going to address this. And every year that we wait, this becomes much more difficult. With the plans outlined by staff at present, no new programs come in line for another year. So I ask that the staff be truthful with their numbers, and that the council asks staff to give real solutions to the problem at hand. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Cole.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Cole. So those are all the hands raised we see right now. If you would like to speak on this item, please raise your hand quickly and we will try to incorporate your comments.
Mayor, I have a Shannon McEntee.
Let's move to Ms. McEntee, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead. You have 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you. I left some written comments as I read the SCAP online, and I thank you for managing to do that online. I had a thought since then that I wanted to mention. I live in a 4-story, 55-unit condominium building, and we don't have any electric chargers here. So I was thinking that would be another thing to add to future plans, is to require or incentivize adding electric charging stations in older buildings. I think that would be not only an encouragement, but it would help people that would like to have one. And then I also just wanted to ask you, don't lose steam on this. The coronavirus is a huge distraction, but nothing can be more important than this all of these environmental issues. So thank you for your service for the city and for staying focused. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. And those are all the commenters I see so far.
Yes, that's it.
Okay. Let's conclude public comment on this item and come back to council. It's 9 p.m. We were scheduled for this item 8:30 or 9:15, and we were scheduled this item 8:30 to 9:30. So just want to remind us all of that. So I'm happy to welcome questions, comments, and motions. The first hand I see is Councilmember Niss.
So I understand the last speaker who spoke about distraction. I think that will be easy to get distracted. But at the same time, I think we need to stay realistic. This community may not look the same in June or July or even a year from now. We could be dramatically different. It was very sad to hear Dan Gordon tonight coming to say this was the final straw. I knew that he had already been having difficulty, but it's very sad to hear a very classic downtown restaurant is leaving. I am wondering if this plan isn't a little like losing weight, where you start out with a big bang and you lose all that weight, and then forevermore you're trying to lose that 5 or 10 pounds. And I think maybe we need to look ahead and say, how do we get that final result that we've been after? And I think Eric and Allison addressed that a bit earlier. The woman who just spoke about EV charges, I have thought that for so long. I don't know what our incentive can be to get them into apartment buildings, but if you live in an apartment building without a charger, I think you're not going to be as tempted to buy a car that's an electric vehicle. So I would urge us to put this on for next year. As far as the Bay Area Equality Management District that I serve on, I would say take a look at their Cool California. It's a good guide to have to continue forward. Also, the Air Board has another goal that they have set, which is to be diesel-free by 73. So if you look at any charts, you will see that it's cars, trucks, and so forth that make all the difference in our air quality. Especially, as I mentioned earlier, as you look out now, it's really absolutely amazing and a beautiful blue sky. And then reducing our gas by half is going to be a true challenge. And while we've agreed to go to all electric houses, that's going to take some period of time. We overturn so few houses in Palo Alto every year that for us to really have that happen, sort of whole hog by half, we would have to dramatically change the gas that we're using. So with that, thank you, Mayor Fine, very much, and I'll move us along.
Is that a motion, or you're just ending your comments?
Well, I'm glad to make it a motion to accept this. I don't want to shortchange anyone else, but if anyone's interested in seconding the motion and therefore would be speaking to it, I would move that motion.
Okay, so Councilmember Niss has moved the staff recommendation. Is there a second for that?
I'll second.
Thank you, Councilmember Tanaka. Councilmember Niss, do you want to speak to your motion?
No, I think I've spoken to it. I would agree. You know, I wouldn't be quite as harsh as David Cole was tonight, but I do think we need to move things along. And the interesting part of it is, you know, it's all of us that move this along. It isn't staff and it isn't community members who speak every so often. It's really us. That's the hardest part.
Thank you. And Councilmember Tanaka.
Yeah, you know, I think Councilmember necessarily kind of said it, the things I was going to say, but I think, you know, climate change is real. It's very important. We have to make some progress on it. Yeah, but there are constraints. So I think that we want to do it as efficiently as we can.
Thank you, sir. I see a hand from Councilmember Cormack.
Thank you, Mayor Fine. I guess I want to start with slide 8, Ms. Long, if you could please, the process, just so I understand where we are and what it is you're expecting from us. And while you're finding that, so I heard the description of SMART goals and actions, and I heard that AECOM will do the impact analysis in Q3, but I only see us here now. So can you help me understand what goals and actions, who is going to choose these goals and actions and when?
Christine, would you like to take a crack at that?
Sure. So it's a combination of, so after AECOM does the impact analysis, we're going to present the results to council for your guidance on what direction we need to take, what are the hard choices we need to make in terms of, you know, do we need to have mandates or what have you to get to the goals we need to the targets we need to reach the goal. And then we're going to bring it to the community at the 2020 SCAP Update Summit to help us decide on the final goals and key actions.
Okay, so this is the council's only opportunity before AECOM starts their work to provide appropriate goals and direction on goals and actions. Is that right?
In the process, I'm sorry, Christine, I'm just going to say in the process we've laid out as formal meetings with the council, that is the case. If you'd like to direct us to come back again, we'd be fine with doing that, I believe.
Okay, that's helpful. And I may come back with a friendly amendment on that. Sorry, I do have a fair number of questions on this. It's such an important topic, and we haven't seen it in quite some time. Perhaps it'd be helpful if I go in order with the areas. How about that? So I'll just whip through them as quickly as possible, just in terms of goals and actions that I think would be appropriate based on, you know, being part of the UA, you know, being the assistant liaison and the liaison to the UAC and attending the electrification workshop and a various number of meetings with people who know a whole heck of a lot more about this than I do. In terms of energy, I would like staff to look at on-bill financing. I would like to understand if that is possible or not, and when, and why not. And establishing numbers of heat pump water heaters, those are all things that I think would be appropriate. In terms of mobility, interesting suggestion from someone about work from home days, now that so many people are demonstrating they are able to work from home. It'd be really interesting to think about that, not just from a mandate, but also from, you know, a way we could do social norming or encouraging of that. The ideas around electric vehicles, I mean, it's really been clear from the beginning that this is one of the ways we can turn it over most quickly, even more quickly than water heaters, right, which are harder to make change with. So whether it's, you know, a task force, I think in all of these areas, what I'd like to encourage, instead of making incremental progress, I want us to look at the destination and move backwards. And that's the part that I think is missing. Kudos to all the people who went before us and all the work that has been done, right? We do have a lot to be proud of. And also we have every reason to be concerned we aren't going to hit the mark unless we look at what it is and move backward instead of sort of, looking at, well, what's the one change we could make this year? That's just an overall comment. Very excited about the One Water strategy. I think that will really move it from being part and parcel of different departments into being something that we can think about holistically. Sea level rise, we need the plan. We just need it. It's not entirely clear to me when we get the sea level rise plan. Would someone be able to update me on that?
Sure. I think in Christine's presentation earlier, she mentioned the RFP that was done. So we've negotiated a contract that also happens to be with AECOM that we're planning to bring to the council sometime in May or June.
And when would we get the results of that?
The idea was to have the plan roughly at the end of this calendar year. That may have slipped a little. Okay.
Still nervous about that, only because I live in that blue area, right? Not just that, but that's one of the reasons. And then in terms of the environmental sustainability, I think that is an area we're on the forefront. Councilmember Niss spoke about the trees earlier and green stormwater infrastructure. So I think we're making appropriate movements there. But and then with respect to zero waste, we've spent an awful lot of time on that as a council and made a lot of changes. But again, it's a small number when you look at the overall part. So those are all the areas. And again, my general thought is we should be focused more on what we're trying to get to and work our way back than making incremental progress. I did want to ask about the webinar workshop. I received that email. It was a little unclear to me but it looks like you asked people to register for every one of them. I wonder what some of the lessons learned were that you did. First of all, kudos for a creative attempt to share information and get input. But what were some of the lessons learned? Because we may have to be doing this for some period of time on this particular topic.
Christine, do you have some insight on that?
Sure. So some of the lessons learned were that it's always better to have the webinars on demand so people can watch them anytime they want. We chose to go with GoToWebinar for several reasons, but the limitations of GoToWebinar are they give you two choices for pre-recorded webinars. Either you can show the recording as is, and that allows the user to pause, rewind, and forward, but then there's no opportunity for feedback. The chatbot doesn't work, the polling features don't work. Or you can have the recorded webinar set up as how we did it for this time, which is called a simulated live webinar, where you can put responses in the chat box, you can answer polls, and all of your comments are recorded, but you can't pause or rewind or forward. So in the future, I think what we're going to do instead is just do the recorded version where you can pause, rewind, and forward, and then have a link to like a survey or online questionnaire to provide your feedback. Instead, it's a little clunkier, but a lot of the feedback we got was people wish they could pause and rewind and forward. Some of the other feedback we got was to be more clear about the length of each webinar. We did mention it in the invite, but if you choose the simulated live webinar option, it doesn't show you the time remaining. So again, if we go to just the flat out recorded version, it shows the time remaining. And some of the other feedback we got was that they liked that we gave them the presentation slides, and that we should continue to provide more opportunities like this to have the pre-recorded working out some of the glitches.
Great, thanks so much for that. It was interesting to see the big drop off from the people who started to the people who continued. So, any other survey information you have, I'm sure will help improve it for the next time. So I guess what I'd like to do is make a friendly amendment to the maker and seconder that an interim report be brought back to council before AECOM does the impact analysis of goals and key actions. And if staff wants to help me refine that, again, my objective would be for us to have an opportunity to go from this high level down into the details a little bit more, so that we have an opportunity to give you suggestions about these goals so that AECOM can work on the actions. So is staff comfortable? Yeah, let me just make sure staff's comfortable with this.
Yes, this is Brad. I think we're comfortable with this.
Okay, at least it's understandable. All right, Councilmember Niss?
Yes, I think that's actually a really good addition.
Councilmember Tanaka?
I'll accept it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I look forward to seeing this again, and you know, given the number of details, well done to try to keep us going on that, but there is so much more to do. Thank you.
Councilmember Cormack, I'm hearing, I just wanted to see if we can get a little more specific. Vague, Brad, I heard you say not by the end of June, but are you thinking maybe by August or September? Is that what I heard? I put words in your mouth. That's what I thought I heard.
I don't think I said that. When I answered a question about when we would be bringing something back, it was the sea level rise plan.
Sorry.
So I'm not sure yet what the timing would be on bringing these actions and goals back to council before AECOM's impact analysis.
Can you make a guess?
June would be likely, I think.
So I think that not to embellish your suggestion, Allison, but I think having some kind of goal in there wouldn't hurt. So
right, so perhaps before the end of the council session in June, before we go on break.
Yes, unless it's impossible to do, Brad, and it may be because of outside indicators, but I think that would be a laudable goal.
Okay, amended. Thank you.
Is that all, Councilmember Cormack? Thank you. Okay, next I see Vice Mayor Du Bois.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for this discussion. I think we're on the right track. A couple of quick questions. So my understanding is that so AECOM will track like what we achieve, and so a lot of what we're asking for in terms of where we are in terms of metrics will be coming out of that work. Is that correct?
I describe it as two kind of separate things, types of work they're doing for us. So one is developing the inventory, as Christine mentioned, for 2019. We came to you this time with the Earth Day report, but we didn't have the updated numbers because AECOM is going to do that for us. So that's a little simpler than the task of saying, what are the key actions and new programs that we should evaluate? And are we confident that those can get us to the 80 by 30 goal? And right. That's what we were talking about in terms of like a further council review of those actions.
Okay. And one of the speakers asked about level of service as like an indication of congestion and local pollution. Are you going to bring that up with AECOM? Is it just a focus on VMT, or we also look at level of service?
I think I'll ask Sylvia Starlack from the Office of Transportation to answer that question.
Hi, council member. Thank you for the question. The comprehensive plan requires us to, well, state law requires us to convert our CEQA impact analysis for transportation from LOS to VMT analysis for projects that are large enough that require that require a CEQA analysis. At the same time, our comprehensive plan requires us to use level of service analysis for local transportation impacts. So we will be doing the things that Arthur Keller asked us to do. We will be retaining LOS for local analysis, and we will be using VMT for CEQA impact analysis.
But for this greenhouse gas analysis for the SCAP?
AECOM will also, so AECOM's sub-consultant will be working with us on the VMT conversion of our CEQA analysis to VMT. And they will also be working with us on conducting the greenhouse gas emission inventory from transportation sources.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Sounds good. So I just had a few thoughts. So, you know, I've been doing a lot of reading on this in this area. And I think it was a year ago that renewable energy passed coal in the US, you know, and so, you know, like I was saying earlier in the Earth Day comments, you know, the energy landscape has really changed a lot in the last 10 years. I think the world record right now for power was a solar plant in Saudi Arabia that was at $1.80 a kilowatt hour. And so we have this amazing clean energy. You know, the next part of that is batteries. Battery prices have fallen a lot, but you know, we got more to go there. And so my earlier questions about thinking about the future of energy as we think about this SCAP plan over the next 10 years and beyond that really is, you know, what can Palo Alto do to kind of stay ahead of the trend? We're currently carbon neutral. We could really go carbon free if we think about it and we dream about it. You know, as you play these scenarios out, some people are predicting that we're going to have essentially free energy or very cheap energy. And you know, how do we think about our utility and managing in that kind of environment? You know, if energy becomes like the long distance phone call, right? You used to worry about making a long distance phone call and what it was going to cost, and you don't do that anymore. And so I think, again, we have a very interesting role to play as a city with our own utility and thinking about government regulation in that environment. And so to pick up on what some of my colleagues have been saying about thinking about the big picture and the goal, you know, it's clear right now it's transportation. It's the biggest bucket, has been. And I think we would really need to focus on EV and keep driving that adoption rate up in the city. You know, and we're going to add in the electrified heating and cooling for homes and businesses, but a really strong focus on electric vehicles. I think it's going to go a long way. You know, the city itself should be aggressive in terms of our fleet, our shuttles. But, you know, I think one of the ideas I'd really like to see us explore as we work through this plan is thinking about, you know, a big program, a media campaign, incentives, anything we can do where we would say that nearly all replacement cars citywide are electric. I think that's a big goal. I think it would get attention. I think it's something we should try. So thank you for the report. Thank you for the motion. And I'm looking forward to the summit, hopefully in the fall. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Mayor. I don't see hand raises from other colleagues. So hit the raise hand button if you want to speak. Great. Councilmember Filseth.
I was going to say I already spoke, and I'm looking forward to seeing the outcome results.
That's it. Great, thank you. Councilmember Tanaka.
Yeah, so just a few quick questions from staff. And I think some of the speakers mentioned this, and you guys probably saw it written in, but you know, with this shutdown, a lot of people have experience now working from home. And for some people, it's actually been okay, right? Especially people who can work remotely, like software engineers and things like that. What has staff done, or what is staff thinking in regards to being able to sustain some of that momentum? Like, I think Liz talked about how we have, like, you know, these incredibly blue skies, and I've seen pictures of my hometown in Los Angeles, where I grew up, where it was like, you know, total smog everywhere, and it's like amazing right now. So what's the you know, what are some of the thoughts about incentives around trying to encourage at least some portion that can to keep on going as they're doing right now in terms of working from home?
Well, the city's remote work policy, there have been discussions about this in the past, even before the COVID-19 emergency, about how that could be effective, both in terms of productivity of employees that could telework, and frankly, the sustainability and greenhouse gas impacts of that as well. So I think that'll be ongoing. For me, I think it's really interesting and notable that we've got such a large proportion of city employees who kind of had to instantly shift to this mode of telework, and all together, really as multiple teams, learn to use the different tools that are helping them to still be productive. And so I think that's going to speak a lot to the way some work still happens in the future, and probably even more so in private industry, where remote work was more of a regular factor to begin with. I think we're seeing across the board that in companies and industry areas where that wasn't so much the norm practice, it's being adopted successfully now and is likely to continue. And probably even absent anything the city necessarily does as part of our sustainability plan, I would expect that we're going to see some significant changes in a positive way that result from that eventually, once the recovery has happened.
Yeah, thank you. And I applaud you guys for making that transition, because I know it's tough. You have to go from more like FaceTime, how much FaceTime you have, to, what you actually got done. So, but I guess I wasn't really asking in regards to the city, although it was very interesting to hear about it. What I was asking about is like the private companies, right? Are there incentives that we could put in place that would encourage people to, I think some people talked about a couple of days a week or whatever, work from home, right? Because that's like total elimination of greenhouse gas for at least that day when they work from home. So I don't know if you guys started thinking about it, but if not, maybe it's something to start thinking about.
Thank you. That's a good comment.
Okay. And then you guys talked a little bit about it in the report, but transportation is still one of the largest sources of greenhouse gas for us, right? I mean, does homes certainly have one, and offices also have some, but the transportation is one of the biggest. And so how does this mesh together with the bike? Because we're trying to also improve the bikeability, right? We had a recent death of a middle school kid biking, right? Got hit by a car or truck, whatever. And so how does this mesh together? Because of course, if you promote better bike infrastructure, then you reduce the transportation greenhouse gas, right? And so I guess I'm just trying to think about how that fits together.
Yes, I'll ask Sylvia Starlack to speak to that. I'll just say it is very interesting that when we look at the 80 by 30 greenhouse gas goal in terms of transportation, we've got two linked things. We've got in overall mobility, trying to do things that reduce vehicle miles traveled, while at the same time the shift to electrification that reduces the greenhouse gas impact of each vehicle mile traveled on average. But Sylvia, can you expound on that?
Yes, thank you for the question. The SCAP, or the key actions that we are working with right now have to do with a multi-pronged approach towards reducing single occupancy vehicle commuting and SOV VMT in town. So things like funding the TMA. We'll talk about transit at some other day, but things like building out our bike plan. The more you make it safer for folks to bike in town, the more likely they are to use that mode. There are many things we can do. I can talk for hours about what we could do around bikes, but I won't. But a very big part of the SCAP policies, I think, will be around helping people find other modes, in addition to the push for EVs. Just to get back a little bit around to talk about telework, the TDM ordinance that we are going to be working on coming up in the end of the year, hopefully, can address some of the telework issues that you were talking about before. We are also looking into micro mobility options. I know they are important to you, Councilmember Tanaka. So, we are looking at all of the possibilities.
Well, one program you may want to look at, if you haven't already, is I think Stanford Research Park, or maybe Stanford University, I forgot which one, has a program where they actually pay you if you bike to work, which I thought was really interesting. And so those are kind of the incentives. I know money's tight right now, so there's only so much we could do, but it's interesting to see how you can use dollars to actually make a tangible impact on reducing the greenhouse gas. And you can actually, because people have to actually track it, they have to use Strava or something like that to track they're actually not driving, they're actually biking or something.
Yeah, the city hired me from that program.
Oh, okay, there you go. So you know about the program. So anyways,
We have our own version of that program, but I think we pay like $1 a day, right? And it's not enough to make you change your mode.
Yeah, but anyways, I'm just trying to think of, because it seems so because transportation is such a big chunk of our greenhouse gas. Even small improvements on that really has a big effect, because that's a big chunk of our emissions, right? And so anyways, it sounds like you already know about it, and but I think these programs are very, very linked together closely, and that's why I think it's important to yeah. Anyways, I'm appreciating the choir, so thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Ku.
Thank you. So it's along Greg's, Councilmember Tanaka's questions about telecommuting. So with our shelter-in-place order in place right now, I was wondering, is there any tracking of the GHG levels at this time?
No, there's nothing specific that we're doing to track them right now. Obviously for our employees, greenhouse gas emissions from their commutes have dropped dramatically. I did just check recently for the city fleet in terms of fuel usage, and I think we've seen drops on the order of 30%.
Oh,
but of
wow.
course, a lot of our fuel usage has to do with police and fire responses as well, which of course are ongoing.
How about the people who commute into Palo Alto from other employment?
That's down dramatically as well, but not something that we've tried to calculate.
Would it be wise to kind of have that baseline? Or are you just following the 1990s?
It's a hard number to come up with. Essentially, that model for the number of vehicle miles that are traveled into and out of Palo Alto for commutes is part of that analysis that AECOM subcontractor is doing for us.
Well, and let me just add, I know we've been talking about it at staff, so we should, or among staff, so I think we will certainly want to check in with whether it be BACMED or Air Quality Management District, VTA, MTC, the various regional agencies that have these specific areas of responsibility, to find out if they are doing any real-time updates to their actual data collection to see what we can glean from this really unique experience.
Yes, thank you. That would be great to take advantage, this opportunity that is here. But also, did I hear correctly that you said that you'd be measuring the emissions from the airport as well, Palo Alto Airport?
No, we have not been measuring impacts. I'll ask Christine to jump in. I think I'm remembering that we've added something new for that in AECOM's contract for the upcoming inventory.
Okay, just confirm that I actually heard it.
Yes, that's correct. We have not included airport emissions in past inventories, but the new protocols for greenhouse gas emissions inventories requires us to, from here on out, include the airport emissions. So starting with our 2019 greenhouse gas emissions inventory, we will be including airport emissions.
And Christine, this is only Palo Alto Airport, or will we also be tracking the airplanes that are going over our skies to San Francisco and San Jose? No? Okay.
No, just Palo Alto Airport.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Councilmember Koo. So a couple questions and maybe an amendment or two, friendly amendment. So a number of speakers have raised the idea of on-bill financing for residents and businesses, kind of providing them with an optionality to invest in their own, climate-saving initiatives. What are we doing in terms of that?
Christine, Tam, would you like to answer that question? We also have Assistant Director Jonathan Abenshine from the Utilities Department, and whichever of you I think is closest to that could answer.
Thank you, Mayor Fine, for the question. I'll take a stab at answering that question. So the utilities billing system currently cannot support an on-bill financing program. However, we are in the process of upgrading the utility billing system, and we expect that the upgrade will be completed over the next couple of years. It does take a little bit of time to upgrade the billing system because that's also tie-in with the city's other IT infrastructure upgrade, including the AMI upgrade. So as I remember correctly, it will be at least another 2 or 3 years before the billing system, the billing system upgrade will be complete. And at that time, we will then be able to offer on-bill financing.
Okay. So I mean this respectfully, but I think we need a little bit more options in terms of that. And I'm wondering, are there opportunities for us to accelerate that? Because as we look at what some of our citizens are asking us for, and as we look at what we're asking our citizens to invest in, on-bill financing really makes a lot of sense. And it's kind of leveraging existing resources. So is there any way for us to accelerate that in terms of providing that ability sooner than a couple of years?
We can certainly explore other types of off-bill financing programs, and we can definitely look at different options.
Okay.
The on-bill option is not feasible at this point.
Thank you. I'm not going to put that in a motion or an amendment, but I do want to stress to staff, I think this is a good place for us to go. And as we've seen with some other programs in Palo Alto and other cities, it's something we need to pursue. So if we can accelerate that, that would be appreciated. Next area I want to talk a little bit about is transportation and single occupancy vehicles. So as I look at it and some of the accomplishments we've made, I think they're significant. I think a lot of them have been in the range of providing carrots or positive alternatives to driving, which are totally legitimate, and we should do that. I'm wondering at what point does the city consider, to use the term, sticks to single occupancy driving? Are we looking at things like paid parking downtown? Are we looking at congestion pricing? I understand in this environment, those are really weird questions that may not be applicable. But at what point do we begin to evaluate the other side of the coin there?
Sylvia, can you answer, please?
Hi, thank you for the question. We have on our work plan to look at paid parking downtown. Congestion pricing is new, and we could explore that. You're right. Most of our alternatives are positive alternatives. I think parking is the big one that gives us the most, where we have the most leeway, frankly. I did come from the Stanford TDM program, and the reason that program works so well is because the parking is priced correctly.
Well, let me add, Mayor, I think as you're suggesting in terms of ways that this process, the process of developing our update to the SCAP, can be helpful to advance things like that. Whether it be going full on in terms of a program, or just even experimenting with things like we've in some of our conversations joked about ice-free days, as in if you want to park on University Avenue 1 day a week, it's only for electric vehicles, and various kinds of experiments like that. So as we think about this work plan for the SCAP, this might be a good opportunity for us to explore those kinds of creative test cases.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of like paid parking especially, we don't have to be terribly creative, right? This isn't like new frontier for many cities. A lot of places have done this. And one anecdote I'll share, I spoke recently with the former city manager of Redwood City, who was in charge of the city during the last recession. And he said one of the smartest things they did is implement paid parking during the recession of 2008, 2009. There was low volume. They were able to implement it at low prices. And when the economy came back, people acclimatized to it much better. And so I just put that out there as kind of, is there a silver lining to some of this? I mean, I'm still absolutely struck every time I go downtown and how empty it is. It's really quite sad, but I wonder if there are opportunities in that. And then the last question for staff is, we've had a lot of folks asking us, some of this progress in the SCAP is good, we need to do more work, all understandable. And kind of a question driving at a recurrent theme there is like, what does our progress and our future look like if we stop counting carbon offsets? And does that need to be additional direction? I understand why we've done them. It's a cost-effective solution to bring down our GHG emissions. That's fair. But there is a little bit of kind of accounting business involved in that. And I wonder what our progress and our situation looks like going forward if we are not to count those. And I'm wondering if staff has any thoughts there.
Thank you, Mayor. That's a good question. And yes, we've got a lot of feedback on that. You might have noticed that in your staff report, in the chart where we showed reduction, it led with a header that mentioned I think it's the 56% decrease. Then after the input we got from a number of members of the public in the presentation that Christine gave tonight, we actually led with the lower number. And so, we've been saying for a while, the carbon offsets are really a bridge, but I think it's a valid point, and we understood the point that we don't want the public to see that higher number and feel like we're really a lot closer to our 80% goal than we are.
Okay.
When, again, just to add a bit there, not unlike the issue of parking pricing, the gas pricing is also a lever that we really have just barely started to tackle. And so I think again, potentially as a part of this SCAP update, the question of what role not only the offsets, but the charge and the use of the funds, in a longer term basis could be most beneficial in terms of advancing whether it's specifically electrification or any other SCAP goals.
Okay, understood. So I would appreciate if we can continue doing that kind of dual book accounting, but I really think we do need to tack towards not counting those offsets as much as we have in the past. Just a piece of feedback. Those are my questions and comments. I don't see anything else from my colleagues. So we can go back to the motion. Thank you very much. Let's please vote on this motion, unless there's anything else. Let's start with Councilmember Cormack.
Yes.
Vice Mayor DuBois.
Yep.
Councilmember Filseth.
Yes.
Myself is yes. Councilmember Niss. I think you're on mute, Liz.
Yes.
Thank you. Councilmember Koo.
Yes.
And Councilmember Tanaka.
Yes.
Thank you. So that passes unanimously. Thank you very much to staff. Thank you for the very large team which brought this forward. I know it's a lot of work, and kind of encapsulating it in an hour and a half is a lot of work. So we truly appreciate that. That finishes our action items for the night. Next, we move on to council member questions, comments, and announcements. I'm just going to go alphabetically again to see if folks have anything to say or share. Council member Cormack, Vice Mayor Du Bois. Tom, sorry.
Sorry, flipped. Yeah, I just wanted to say I'm a new block preparedness coordinator. It's really easy. So I'd recommend it to all of you guys.
Nice. Council member Philseth.
Nope.
Council member Niss.
Yeah, there are a couple of things I wanted to mention. In addition to those blue skies, has anyone else noticed there aren't as many planes in those blue skies? It's really rather stunning. Have you not noticed that?
I have noticed it.
Yeah. If you haven't, go walk the Baylands or someplace else, because I think that's astonishing. So I want us to reflect on the emptiness right now. The skies are not as full. The air is clearer. The downtown is very sad to look at, but very empty. A couple of results of this have been, as Councilmember Cormack said, the drivers have increased their speed rather markedly, which is I wouldn't have expected that would happen. And secondly, have you ever noticed so many dogs in your life? I think people must have gone out and bought dogs because they are everywhere. There's even a kind of bad joke of a dog up very high on a cabinet saying, "Please, no more walks today. I've done all I can do." So on a lighter note, good night, everybody.
There's going to be a lot of separation anxiety from these puppies when we all go back to work.
Yes.
Councilmember Koo.
Just congratulations to Vice Mayor Du Bois, and I agree with Councilmember Niss. There is definitely less airplanes in the air, but the airplanes that are flying over are flying lower. So just my 2 cents. Have a good night.
Thank you. So after Lydia, Councilmember Tanaka.
Yeah. So I know that the city manager asked all of us for recommendations of people to be on the roundtable. So I really appreciate Ed, you moving so quickly on that. I think I'm getting emails from people almost daily going bankrupt. So it's the urge is really critical. I mean, this is spoken about many times that downtown Cal Ave, I mean, almost everywhere is, of course, it's all shut down. So it's pretty devastating. So I think it's to kind of line the ball. I think we need to move quickly before people decide, like Dan, who's say, "Hey, I'm tossing the towel. I'm not going to do it anymore." So we need to move quickly. And you know, the other thing is, he mentioned about the minimum wage, and I mean, I've talked to a lot of restaurant owners. A lot of them say the same thing, and I wonder, like, is that something that maybe we should have some flexibility on, because it's to actually run a restaurant, it's largely labor, that's the cost. And yeah, anyways, just some thoughts I've been thinking of. Maybe staff could think about the stuff as part of your roundtable, part of the discussion. But I think we need to move quickly if we want people to come back, and we don't want this to be a permanent downturn. One last thought is so I think it's great that staff is not going to enforce the fee on paper bags. And I know this is a small topic, but I know some people really care about it. So maybe Ed, you guys do this great, COVID-19 update all the time. Maybe you guys can include that somewhere so that the retailers, should they want to give relief to people who really, really are hardened down on their luck, don't have to pay the extra couple of dollars. And I know for most of you guys are very, this kind of stuff is like nothing to you guys. But I know for a lot of people in Palo Alto that live here, this is meaningful dollars. And so I think we want to just be kind of empathetic to that. And so if retailers do want to, nickel and dime, not want to nickel and dime people on these paper bags, let them, right? So if I don't know if that's possible for you to put that as part of your guys' update so that people see that.
Sure.
Okay, great, thank you.
Great. Just one or two comments. So one, I do want to remind folks, I mentioned it a couple of weeks ago before this whole crisis, that California HSR is releasing a series of EIRs on some of their upcoming segments. Some of those are now live. I encourage you to go check them out and comment on them as necessary. And the other thing is just something I've kind of noticed from a lot of residents and talking with our city staff. If you are a resident or a business or somebody visiting Palo Alto and you see behavior that does not conform with county or city rules, please call our police non-emergency line. And if somebody can repeat that number after I finish speaking.
329-2413.
There you go, from the city manager. Thank you so much, Ed. That's a really important way. Please do not confront folks if you see them violating a known behavior. Just call our police non-emergency line. The professionals will take care of it. We do need that community information, but we don't want folks intervening themselves. If there is nothing else, I believe we are adjourned at 10:05 p.m. That's all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
everyone.
Good meeting.
Thank you. Good night.
Ciao.